Hey, Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to the triumphant return of Dice Over Everything Longform Podcast. So, this is episode 99 after a super long hiatus.
Yeah, well, we're not going to be talking about Order 66 because that would mean we started playing Star Wars Legion, and we're not about to jump into that. But what we did do is go way back
That's
further.
for the summer, I assume.
Oh, I don't know. They haven't tempted me just yet. But I think we want to go back to like a different era where there was like rock music on the radio and people were playing like grungy video games like Doom and like Wolfenstein. Not these like newfangled, shiny, polished like Cyberpunk and Overwatch and all that. No. We got to go back to the old school. Got to go back into the 90s here. Do you remember those days?
We're still clinging on to super tall mohawks as a thing that you could actually walk outside and not feel weird.
Wow,
Well,
yeah, that's. No, I do remember seeing people with mohawks back then. It's like, man, I haven't seen one of those in a while. But talking about that, have we seen a good game from GW in a while, or do we have to go back for that?
Yes, we have seen a good game.
But we went way back, didn't we?
Yes, the original Necromunda from 2000. No, wait.
You could open the cover of that book because it would tell you that's not just like a printout. Because what I have here in front of me for quick start rules, this very gray thing, this says 2019, but in reality it's from 2017. They just reprinted it.
This is 1995 Necromunda.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just finished playing a few games of the original Necromunda, and this is a long story and a long time coming. Do you want to? I think we've mentioned it a lot on the podcast.
Yeah,
during the D6 minutes as we've been trying to catch up, so that we have the same number of D6 minutes as Dice Over Everything's.
Yeah, because we've talked about we were playing the Dark Uprising campaign. We built a bunch of war bands for that. Talked about painting it. And then we talked about getting halfway in and then just like hitting a wall, like the wall where you try and go from the Underhive to the Spire and you just like bounce off of it or get shot with like weapons that are far beyond your crappy stubbers.
Do not collect $100.
No.
Don't collect ammo. Yep. Just get mowed down with pain.
But do you think in this era there's even like a demand for a Necromunda game? Like just thinking of like our shift in like all that 90s grunge rock, the video games are all filthy to like what people are consuming now.
For sure. Yeah. There's a huge desire. So here's the crazy thing. I don't know if it's just nostalgia or whatever. I mentioned this as well. So there's Mordheim, which is the fantasy version of Necromunda. So Necromunda, what makes it special, just for people who have no idea what this cool ass thing is besides an awesome cover.
Mm-hmm.
With mohawks.
And for those who are just listening and not watching, it is a very 90s cover art of the Goliath in like
it
heavy
is like
metal,
rock music,
hair
heavy
band,
metal, yeah.
Get up, yeah.
Exactly. Everyone on the cover has mohawks, and they're all standing out there like bosses shooting guns randomly.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you mentioned Mordheim, though, but Mordheim hasn't got a resurgence.
It has.
It has amongst the community, but not amongst the sales numbers, the bottom line.
Well, yeah, because it is not being sold, but it actually has, I think, had a bump up in terms of interest. And I think it all is kind of related, I guess. So during the pandemic, a lot of people have, there were a lot of new people who tried Warhammer 40,000, right, buying models and things like that. But playing Warhammer 40,000 takes a lot of models and a lot of effort. The buy-in is huge. So I feel like skirmish games where you're playing only with a few number of guys is has kind of like a secondary resurgence because, people play the big stuff and they're like, well, this is too many guys. I want to play smaller guys. I only ever painted 10 guys. Can't we play games with that? And so there's Kill Team, but there's a lot of other kind of small skirmish games. And you look at the independent indie circuit, all of these skirmish games are coming in because those are the type of games that you can more easily get into. You have an easier buy-in. And so all these new people I think are moving more towards that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, the thing with Necromunda and Mordheim, why I mentioned it, is that it's a campaign-like game where you collect your, 10 to 20 guys in your warband, and then you play games, and the guys that die, and the guys that survive gain more experience and become better. And you're kind of having this story, this role-playing like aesthetic that's going on. And that, to me, is this, in some ways, maybe even the bigger deal. Yeah. It's because Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games are blowing up huge, like blowing up in the positive way. In 90s, blowing up was a bad thing. Mm-hmm. but nowadays, people
that's actually
a
kind
lot
of
of people play RPG games.
Well, even think of people playing like other games where they're like, oh, I gotta do my dailies to get all this extra loot and stuff like that. People aren't thinking of just like going in doing the one-off game. They're thinking, like, at least the game makers are like, no, we want people to stay in this cycle rather than just doing one thing then dropping it to move into another thing. They want them like feeling like there's a sense of continuity and they're gathering stuff.
Yeah, and with RPGs becoming, in many ways, I don't know if it's even. So I think a lot of people used to say, back in the day that, we all can trace a lineage to Warhammer 40,000. Like, we have a whole generation of gamers who got into miniature gaming because of Warhammer 40K or Warhammer Fantasy Battles, right?
Yep.
But in modern day, I think there's a lot of people who are coming into the skirmish space from Dungeons and Dragons instead. And their kind of idea of what they want from a game is different than the people who come from Warhammer 40,000. And that kind of experience is a lot closer to the Necromunda campaign style system where your guys level up and your band gets stronger than it is to, you fine tune and like min max a army list and then you play one-off games with a giant, huge army.
Yeah, it's not about like building your deck and then having the decks like face off against each other in Warhammer 40K. It's about more like development in between. Yeah,
so I think because of that, I feel like Mordheim has had some sort of resurgence. And of course, there's also the nostalgia factor, right? When you're looking at it, I don't know, there's just a big nostalgia for, bygone eras and times gone past, even not just for miniature games, but just in general, right? Nostalgia is super in. Even like with TV shows and things like that, I don't know, dredging up things from the past and redoing it and thinking what's old is new and is cool again is like, I don't know, it's quite in.
Yeah, just like getting a new Mad Max movie lately, which actually harkens back to that like rock punk aesthetic of the 90s, and then Blade Runner going back and being like pretty big hit. That people are looking for that sort of stuff in the sphere of like action oriented entertainment.
Like I said, when I got into Mordheim, I had a weird like quasi nostalgia where I'd never played Mordheim when I was young. I heard about it, right? But I never played it. I bought a couple of miniatures that I actually just never painted either. But when the chance to play it came about because our local store decided to run a campaign, I jumped on it. And I had this like secondhand nostalgia for a game I had never played, right? Where I just missed it the first time. And so I was not alone, actually. There's a lot of people. There ended up being like 20 people in the Mordheim campaign playing the original Mordheim from 2000 or 1999, who a lot of those guys, some of them definitely had played it on the first go round, but a lot of people played it because, again, they just heard about it and they have the secondhand nostalgia and went and played it.
Yeah, like GW is the big player in the sphere. So when you look to like, okay, what game should we play? Like their games always make it into the list. If you're looking to play skirmish or we're kind of talking about campaign today, you're like, all right, there's Mordheim and Necromunda out there, and they've been around for a long time, and they have good lore behind them too. So Like,
Yeah, in some ways, I think better lore than overall the overall like I don't know what you call it, faction or galaxy spanning empire versus empire,
yep.
right? Necromunda is a lot tighter, and I think in a lot of ways it's just supposed to be one city basically, right? One Necromunda. I guess Necromunda is just the one spire, right? And that's the setting of the story. And because it's more dialed in there, your characters are also more dialed in. And so I feel like it's a lot more personal and in many ways a lot more interesting and fun than the galaxy spanning empires, especially considering that characters are so like named characters are so important in the larger game, whereas with Necromunda they have somehow, I don't know if it's the people who play the game, it might actually be that, but that they remove those characters, and so the characters that you create become a much bigger center of the game.
Yeah, like it's your warband. You want to feel like you're creating the characters rather than playing back some like other battle recreation. Like the historical people who play bigger battles, they're all like, "Oh, I got to recreate this battle." And you're like, "Nah, I want to create my like dudes. I want to create a story for them." And when you're doing that, if you're trying to create a story for something, you really want like a deep like background to it to like fit your guys into. But you don't want to have to be like, playing somebody else's story necessarily, because it might not just like fit the whole theme.
Yeah, that's the thing. You get an ownership of it because of the of not having named special characters. You are naming but you do have named characters. It's just they're named by you, and you get to see your characters grow up to become awesome.
Mm-hmm.
At least that was the premise of this Necromunda and Mordheim as well.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about we mentioned Mordheim, which has only ever had one edition, but Necromunda is a little bit different. Even though Necromunda is in many ways bigger than Mordheim, something separates Necromunda from the general other kind of nostalgic games out there, and that is it got a new version in 2017.
Yeah, and GW producing new versions of things sometimes works out, sometimes it doesn't. So you always have to ask, like, would it be better to be playing like the edition before? And in the case of like 8th to 9th edition, you're like, no, 9th edition fixed a lot of things. So yeah, people are cool playing that. But if say,
no, they're not.
Yeah, well, they're not.
A lot of people say 9th edition is like the worst edition since 7th.
Sweet. They should just go back and play 5th, like when we were, or whatever was around in the 90s. There you go. They should just go full nostalgia.
Whatever one was out at this time. No, I think Necromunda was out during 2nd edition. 2nd edition was
kind of weird. Yeah.
3rd edition I think was better.
Yeah. So that
different game.
That brings up the question for anyone listening to us about if they're thinking of getting started, like on a new campaign or just getting into the game, like what version should you really play? So to answer the question, obviously, we had to do a deep dive into the shallow end of our Necromunda knowledge by playing a bunch of games of both versions.
We play both ones so that you don't have to, and so that you can kind of figure out, like, there's so many different Necromundas out there. There's
Ash Wastes now. If you for some reason want to play a vehicular combat version of a campaign, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess the frame of this podcast will generally be contrasting and comparing the different Necromundas, and then talking about which ones we like and what we like about both, about the many different versions, and which ones we think, maybe rating all of them and then coming to a conclusion of, if you like Necromunda, which one should you play?
Yeah, so I guess like Yak Tribe is kind of the big resource for where to go if you want to use like their online army building programs, and I think they've got like their forums there as well that have lots of downloads for resources and things like that. So they kind of set the tone for what the two versions of the game are, because when you go onto their site and you build your warband, you can choose to build the community edition version, which is kind of like that book you just held up, most up-to-date version. And then there's the main version they use, which came out in 2017, So I guess they refer to that as.
No, it's called the Underhive. It's Necromunda or Necromunda Underhive.
Oh, it's the Underhive tools. Yeah, yeah. But when you go to their forums, I guess the current version came out in 2017, so they call it like N17 in the forums if you're looking for that content. Yep. So that's kind of
so that might be a little bit. I think we've become jumping around, but let's make it clear. What are the different versions of Necromunda we're going to be talking about?
Oh, it's basically the.
What are the different versions of Necromunda, and then what are the versions we're going to zoom in on because we actually played them?
Well, there's the version.
We have some knowledge about them.
There's the version of the book you held up, but then there's the community edition.
But I do a historical thing where we just go through and talk about each different version of Necromunda.
I don't think that's necessary because we're not suggesting anybody go near all the versions. So
no, I think it'll be an interesting thing to go through though.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we just go through them so that everyone understands? This is the original version. The first version that we talked about is Necromunda. Have we even described what Necromunda is in general?
If people got here, I think they know what they're getting into. Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily true, but let's give a one sentence thing. So or whatever, one paragraph. Cole's nose thing. Necromunda is. You want to do it, or you want me to go through it?
If you want to, if people made it this far and don't already know what Necromunda is.
All right, so Necromunda, I think we've already said it's a skirmish combat game where you play a bunch of gangers set in a post-apocalyptic underhive, where basically all of the the rich denizens live in the spire above this underhive, and then it's this giant man-made huge city, and it's just built upwards. And on the top levels, that's where all the higher you go, the more rich you are, and the more opulent your life. And the lower you go, the more work you have to do to kind of maintain the structure. And at the very bottom is the underhive, where lawlessness, like the entire place is like there's no police or rule of law. It's run by a bunch of gangs. And in the game, you play one of these gangs who have decided to go down from the slightly higher levels down to the bottom and try to control basically it's the infrastructure of this giant city. And by doing so, kind of make it rich. And so you play, you build your gang and you play a bunch of missions against your friends where your gang starts to tries to buy equipment and gain experience to take over more territories and become rich and successful, but most likely just gets injured and slowly dies.
There can only be one, so
Yes, exactly. Until maybe one gang or group kind of ends up kind of dominating. And the entire aesthetic, like we said, is not a punk. Is it punk?
Rock.
Oh yeah, it is punk.
Rock and roll, punk, metal.
Yeah, metal kind of aesthetic. I think I showed the cover here. This is one of the covers. And so the aesthetic is you're not a super soldier unlike the normal 40K. You're just a bunch of human gangers using guns. You all can barely, finding actual armor is super rare, so most of your guys don't have armor. You're running around basically naked, but you still get a whole bunch of guns and weapons and like that to kill each other.
Yeah, you're not the most advanced soldiers of the future. You're in the future, but you don't have the money to get the power armor or the exosuits. So
you might end up being awesome, but relatively speaking to, let's say, a platoon of guardsmen, you guys are garbage.
Yeah.
It's the kind of a feel of the game, so that's the kind of aesthetic, and it came out. The first version was in 1995, and it was basically kind of a hit because I think it was the first skirmish campaign game where you build up your guys and they gain experience and things like that. You kind of have that RPG like progression of your guys. As they get better, and some people get injured and die, and then some people get enmity against the enemies, and you keep on playing that and hopefully build up your warband, right, to get better weapons and stuff, so that eventually they might be able to take on that platoon of guardsmen and be on even or maybe even slightly better footing.
Mm-hmm.
You never fight guardsmen, but that's the kind of aesthetic. Yeah, so it was a big hit actually when it happened, and we have some of our friends who played it. Like they said, it was really fun. It was very different than just playing the normal Warhammer Second Edition that was out at the time, right? Or Fantasy, which was like a rank and flank game, right?
Yep. It was more like toy soldiers.
So yeah, it was also pretty. One interesting thing is that it was pretty clean and tight, because back then Games Workshop actually play tested their games.
Yeah, and they wrote that in that book that you're holding. They said we put a lot of work into play testing this.
Yes, and there's like in the back mentioning a whole bunch of people who played even the first couple of play tests, right? Mm-hmm. And they said they play tested a whole bunch more. And so it was quite a big hit. And then there was a bunch of different, back then, their White Dwarf thing. White Dwarf was the magazine, so there would be like some updates and things like that, and some missions and stuff like that in their magazine. And then they released a fantasy version, which was Mordheim, which was a big hit, right?
Yep.
And then the next thing was, they released the expansion book to Necromunda, which is called Outlanders, I believe, which added 5 more factions to the game. And each of these factions was a little bit different, right? They had a little bit more like different equipment. So the first 5 factions of the original Necromunda, they were basically the same, except they could buy different equipment. So unlike if you have played any modern Warhammer 40,000 games, each faction is very, very different. They'll all have different crazy special rules and stuff like that, right? In the original Necromunda, the first 5 warbands, which were, I guess we could mention them.
Goliath, Dalak,
Cawdor, and Orlok.
Orlok, yes.
Yes. So those bands, they were basically the same from their base stats, right? Except that they had access to slightly different equipment. And only when you leveled them up, they also, what differentiated them is that they had access to different level up
skills
trees. Yeah, skills, right? And that was basically the only difference to the bands. So it was a lot more, similar, right? And in that way, it was a lot more tight, right?
Yeah, it was easier to balance that way, obviously, because you're like, well, you all start in the same spot, so it can't start too unbalanced, right?
Unless one piece of equipment is way too powerful, but
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what happened was they released Outlanders, which was 5 new, more out there factions. So then you introduced, I think, what was it? You have mutant scabies. You have one of the most interesting ones was the what are they called again? Oh man, I had them. I should have written that down.
Was it people from the Spire?
Yes, that's the most interesting one. They're like redemptionists, which were like imperial cultists. There were guys. What do you call it? Rat skin vigilant or rat skins, but they were like, so normally rat skins are just like the normal population in the Underhive who basically run away from the gangs who actually control everything. But you could play a rat skin band, which was a bunch of these rat skins whose homes had been destroyed by gangers, so they've decided to like fight back in revenge. And then the last one is the one you're talking about, which were basically the idea is it's a bunch of rich kids from the upper hives with all of this amazing equipment who actually have equipment that like rival like Space Marines in terms of ability, and they basically go down to the Underhive to hunt people for sport. And that is the last kind of warband. So that's the kind of thing that they introduced, which is a lot different. So overall, from what I'd heard, that people loved the game. It was very thematic. There was a lot of fun. It was kind of 2001 AD, which was the Judge Dredd-esque kind of thing. And to be fair, like everything Games Workshop at that time was influenced by 2001 AD, right? This comic book, right? So Judge Dredd had a huge influence on the aesthetic of Necromunda, right? And those kind of stories. And so yeah, so it was a really big hit. After that, they had, I think the final release kind of was a cleaned up version in 2005 where they like repackaged and re-released Necromunda as like a definitive edition. So it's kind of like a second edition, right?
Yeah.
Of the original Necromunda. And I think they had a Necromunda magazine going on for a little while until I think that finally died, I think sometime in the 2000s. So I don't think it made it 2010.
But the 2005 version didn't really alter the core rules all that much. Like the core rules stayed basically the same, but there's probably just some tweaks.
Yes, like exactly. It's like a tweaks. Exactly. So you might say it's 1.5 edition, right?
Yeah.
It's advanced Necromunda, right? And then sometime in between then, because, Games Workshop decided to let that go because historically speaking, the CEO was kind of garbage, and he decided to focus all of the games into his two main moneymakers, which was
Fantasy and 40K.
Fantasy and 40K. And so all of the small games were just like brushed under the rug, and they're like, just focus on those things, focus on the moneymakers.
Yeah.
So Necromunda and stuff like that was canceled.
Yeah, because why sell guys a warband of 10 guys when you can sell them an army of 150 guys?
Yes, exactly.
You got to think of the bottom line here. You got to be a good gang leader to lead Games Workshop.
Exactly. So Necromunda kind of was released from the support of Games Workshop. And however, because it has such a large following, it seems like there have been a number of people who kind of took up the mantle and started and basically created a version of Necromunda to keep it up to date and to balance things and to clean it up. As so many people were playing so many games, right? And there's so many different people who play have their own house rules, to clean up rules, for example, to have some certain things that are too strong, right? And so the community basically, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that in 1995 people weren't just releasing new rule sets on the internet to fix things?
No, it took around, I don't know when it actually, I think it must have been around 2010. I don't know about that, because at that point in time, I was not playing miniature games at the time, so I had a break. But because of that, afterwards, once the internet became a thing, a community edition started becoming popular, like cleaning things up. Actually, the same thing happened with Blood Bowl, which is another game that Games Workshop dropped like a rock during that period, but had a huge following.
Well, yeah, and just if you want the rules, like if they're not selling it, what are you going to do? You've got to go online and find like something if you're going to play with your friends. So if you're going to find something, you might as well find the one like people are promoting, because they're working on it actively.
Exactly. And so there was I think there were a couple of community curated versions of Necromunda, but ultimately it seems like one version of community edition kind of won out in a similar way that what happened with, I think, Blood Bowl, right? So what ended up happening is that there's a community edition for Necromunda that got taken up by Yak Tribe, the thing you mentioned, which is I don't know where they named Yak Tribe. I don't know whether that name came from, but Yak Tribe is basically the website, the community-run website for Necromunda, and it's actually the website for Necromunda. And if you go and you want to play the original Necromunda, they will encourage you to play this community edition version of Necromunda.
Yep. And so that is the version we went back to play for comparison to the one that we abandoned halfway through the campaign.
Yes, because
we could get into why we abandoned it later, but
sure. Yeah, so it would have been happily ever after in some ways, except that in 2017, I think it was a new CEO, right? New CEO came around. I think it's the current CEO, right? Mm-hmm. Is Kevin Roundtree, or is that the old one? I can't remember. No, I think that's the new one. He came around, and they decided to go back, to create, their old games, because they realized all these small games were great ways to keep people who had burned out from the main game in their system, and also to recruit people who were not necessarily interested in their main games into the pipeline to hopefully end up buying a giant, like you said, 150 man armies. So one of the things that they decided to do when they decided to create these specialist games, these small games again, was to re-release Necromunda.
As a boxed game, basically, not
as a boxed game, though, which is different than the original games. The original game, like we said, was a campaign game. The entire point of the game is you're playing it as a campaign. You're building up your squad, and and you kind of see the adventures of your gang as they grow or die, right? Whereas the 2017 version of Necromunda was originally released basically to sell models and use nostalgia.
Yeah, it's kind of like putting out Space Hulk again, which they do every once in a while.
Yep, exactly. Actually, the original Necromunda they released in 2017 was like a Space Hulk game. It was 2 armies with full stats, and the idea was you were supposed to play it like one-off skirmish games. You're not supposed to play it as a campaign. And in fact, the rules didn't even have campaign rules, I don't believe, in the initial box. It was just for people who remembered Necromunda and liked the aesthetic, and they wanted to play the game. And basically what it did is it had rules for you to basically build from scratch like a army, right? And that army would represent not a beginner Necromunda warband, but like a veteran warband that has been fighting for that would have been the equivalent of playing 10 games in the original game. And then you just assemble that, right, with some tweaks, and you fight against your opponent, who also then builds from scratch a veteran warband, and it's supposed to be one-off games just to have a bunch of fun. Yep. And that was the original version of the Necromunda they released. But of course, when they did that, they didn't realize there are so many Necromunda fans, and they released, to their credit, for this box game, beautiful models, brand new Escher and Goliath models who looked super cool and still had that kind of punk aesthetic or 90s aesthetic, which in modern day just seems really alien and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Even though back then that was like, oh yeah, that's where me and my mates dressed up like when we went out, right? But now it's like, well, that is super weird and and interesting. So people would new people would buy in and kind of get into it. And in my opinion, the models are awesome. And it kind of revitalized this Necromunda. But of course, when people think of Necromunda, the game, they think about the campaign. So they seemed to release the game, bolt on a campaign system. And when that ended up selling really well, they rebuilt, on the basis of the skirmish game version of Necromunda, a new Necromunda, which is now known as Necromunda 2017.
Yep. And because it became popular, we decided we should try it out. Yeah.
Unfortunately is spoilers, but if you've heard us talk about this, there's nothing new. As they went on, because it was so popular, they decided to continue to support it. And so, of course, like every other game, what they originally did was rebuild the game, right? But with the the new rules, the new skirmish rules as a basis, right? Because the game was reminiscent of the original Necromunda, but it was entirely new rule set, right? For the original skirmish game of Necromunda, right?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of like you could see there's obviously similarities, but how like the mechanics
it's almost like
work,
callbacks.
Yeah, the mechanics once you get like down to them, they're all like they have mechanics. They both have mechanics for the same sorts of things, but they chose to do a lot of them in different ways.
Yeah. So they cleaned it up and they released a new version with brand new rules. So originally they had released the rules in like piecemeal, and I guess all of those sold well enough. So they, including the models that they released, so they compiled them into 2 books, which was the Necromunda Rules and Necromunda Gangs of the Underhive. And that became the new basis of their new version of the game. But then, and just because those, I guess, also sold really well, they decided to push it up a notch. And during COVID, or actually just a little bit before COVID, they decided to create codex-like releases for all of the gangs of Necromunda, because Games Workshop cannot help themselves. And they're like, wow, if we release these codexes, you can sell a whole bunch of books, basically a whole bunch of new books, and they make a lot of money, I guess, on those books.
Yeah, they've never been able to wean themselves off releasing codexes.
Yep. And so that's actually the version of Necromunda we decided to play, because that was the latest version of Necromunda when we were starting to play it, because we played basically during the pandemic.
Yep.
And then I think you mentioned the last thing is they released another new expansion to be able to play Necromunda outside, not even in the Underhive.
Yeah, which that like we were talking about how the setting's super cool and super fitted for a skirmish game. Playing outside has nothing to do with Necromunda, except it's kind of Mad Max-ish, I guess, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe it could be something, but I feel like when I would want to play Necromunda, I don't think about running around in trucks and vehicles and stuff and doing things outside.
No,
right?
Not at all.
In fact, in the original art, the outside is labeled with like toxic gas. Yep. Toxic gas kind of thing, and everyone basically, I thought everyone just had to stay inside because the outside is just so toxic, but apparently you just got to wear a gas mask and apparently you're fine. So
it won't just burn your skin because it's pure acid rain, not just there's no water left. Yeah. But anyhow, I just want to ignore that version.
So that's the entire history, I guess, as I know it, of Necromunda. And for us, like we mentioned, we are going to talk about 2 versions in particular, which is the ones we played, because we did not try every single version of Necromunda. That would be crazy, as you can tell from how long it took me to go through the history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we went to Yak Tribes and are like, all right, guys, what are the versions we should be looking at? You've put the work in. We just want to like see how these final products compare.
Yeah, so we basically pressed. There's 2 different versions on Yak Tribe. One says Underhive, which is Necromunda Underhive, which is the 2017 version, and then one says Necromunda, which is the original version. But the versions of those 2, when you click on them, if you click on normal Necromunda, I think we mentioned it defaults to the community edition, even though you can choose to play the Necromunda tools with any of the older versions. And then the default for the Necromunda Underhive version is the one with the codexes, which I think are called like House of books.
Yep.
Right? Which have a whole bunch of different rules and new stuff. And that's the version we decided to play, just because it was, the updated version. And we were really excited, actually, to get into Necromunda, because the new models that they've released are really cool. The aesthetics are great. I really like them.
Yeah, when I see people reviewing the game, because I looked at some people's opinions, they're like, oh, the new one's great because they put out new models for it. It's like, exactly. But models work for any game you want them to if they fit the setting. Yeah. So,
and the new models do actually mostly match the factions from the original Necromunda. So I bought a bunch of Cawdor guys, and technically I did buy an Escher warband as well because I was thinking, oh, I should buy two so that if I need to convince someone, I have two warbands to play against each other. I do that for all the kind of games that I'm trying to encourage other people to play. But luckily, I didn't have to do that because a couple of our friends and you also decided to, without playing that much, buy into a faction. So which one did you buy into?
Well, I bought into Corpse Grinders, but buy-in for this, like painting 10 models and buying 10 models, for a miniature gamer, that's nothing. That's like a tiny drop in your bucket of miniature collections. So
that is true.
But
so
obviously,
yep.
So the Corpse Grinders are more of a hand-to-hand faction, which they introduced a little later on, and they don't have
the 2017 version.
Yeah. But they don't have, like, there's no Corpse Grinders back in the original version or the community version. Yeah. So I just played them as Goliaths because they're big, beefy dudes.
Yeah, and Goliath, their faction and their theme is being big and beefy.
Yeah, they've got strength skills and stuff like that.
Yep. All right. So, given that, let's dive into the actual descriptions of the games.
Yeah, like go through some of the differences in the games and how their mechanics work. And then maybe based on like talking about those at the end, we'll get into how that actually affects the gameplay of the two versions.
Sure.
Or, yeah, because like all these things combined with how the mechanics of the game works, once you add them all together, that creates what the gameplay is. So I think it helps to sort of go over the mechanics first and then see why you might want to use one version or the other.
Choose one or the other.
I mean, for some people, maybe they actually like prefer a different type of game. But once they have like the background to it, I think it can help them make a better decision about what version they get into and what version they drag their friends into.
All right. So let's start.
All right. So I think we should start with like movement, because like when you go through rules, movement is like the very beginning rule, right?
It's activation, but
sure. Okay, we'll go back. We'll go back one start to activation. Sure, go back. The very first step.
So so setup is generally, I think, the same, right? They both play on 4x4 boards, roughly. Oh, they don't actually.
Yeah, the new one plays on 4x.
At the very, very beginning, the first thing we have to mention is, so the normal Necromunda games are played on a 4x4 table, right? Which sometimes, and because Necromunda is a indoor giant megacity, you should have a bunch of terrain, right? There should be a decent amount of terrain. All of the art shows like a bunch of terrain and things and different levels where people are running, because it's a mega city structure. So the idea is you should have, buildings going up into the sky, right? Because things
should be tightly packed, like it's a hive. It's not like the great outdoors. So that's what you're building for the game. Should we then go one step back further into the building phase of like building your armies? Like, 'cause that's
actually, that is true. Yeah, so we're going to go one step before that and talk about building armies. Let's do that.
All right. So should we start with, I guess we should start chronologically and just start with community first. We kind of talked about it. We talked about it before, that when you build your war bands, you've got the same sort of selection of Juves, gangers, heavy weapon guys, and your leader. And they all come with the same stats, no matter who you buy them for. It's just a matter of your weapon selections that differ, and you buy different weapons for each of them. But in the beginning, they are all quite similar.
Yep, that's correct.
But then you get to 17, and things get wild.
Yes. So it's in a similar way. You recruit your leaders, but instead of heavies, you recruit champions.
Yeah.
And then you recruit. Actually, I think you still have heavies, and then you recruit your gangers, and then you have Jews, which are your lowest level kind of guys. Now, the difference is, because the lineage for the new Necromunda is a skirmish version, whereas in the original game of Necromunda, your stats, like even your leader is, he's not that much better than a normal ganger, right? Like he's definitely has better stats, but it's equivalent of what did we say, like 3 or 4 stat buffs, right? 4 stat buffs.
Yeah, it's got
Uh,
four higher stats than a Ganger.
yeah, 4 higher stats than a ganger, and a ganger. I don't know. He takes maybe 5 games, 5 6 games, or 6 or 7 games maybe to get those stats, right?
Yeah, it might not be those exact same stats. Like weapon skill and ballistic
Yeah,
skill are pretty important, which he's got higher. But
yeah. But an important thing is they all still have 1 wound, which
yep.
means a bad shot will kill a leader just as easily as it kills a ganger, right? So the range band is like a lot tighter, right? Whereas because in Necromunda 2017, the game is based on, like we said, a skirmish version. Your leaders and champions are super buffed. They have like I don't know how many different stat buffs, like 10, 11, 12 different stat buffs compared to your normal gangers. So your gangers are actually the same level as the starting guys in the original Necromunda, but your champions and your leaders are like super buffed, as if you've just played 10 games.
Yeah, because they come with armor often. They come with like higher stats. They come with abilities that you get to choose.
Yeah.
Like when you build your guys,
They get
you
an
to
extra
choose.
wound on top
Some guys,
and
yeah.
extra attacks. Yeah, so they are like your champion and your leader can just like dice through a whole bunch of gangers, especially in close combat where those stats can really help.
Yeah, and I think because you can pick the abilities you get, it kind of lends itself more to net listing because you're like, well, clearly there's probably some better abilities going on here because it's GW, it's not to be balanced. So rather than having to get your abilities, you're just like, well, I'm just going to pick the best ones from the get-go that I want. So that's how you start your warbands.
Yeah, and so you can kind of, in some ways, it's good at, well, there's positives and negatives, I guess. You can say because you are starting with your champions and your leaders super buffed, it's almost like you've kind of started midway through a campaign because your leaders and your guys are already super buff. Whereas on the other side, without like your on the original Necromunda, you end up starting your gang from the beginning. So they start crappy, and then you get to see them work their way up to become awesome.
Yeah, so
right?
It depends on which
and so that is like,
want.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to play a short campaign, whatever, we'll get into that later. All right, so that's part of the very beginning. Then the next we get into after that, should we talk about the scenarios maybe? Because I guess you pick the scenario before you start using stats.
Scenarios and board.
Yep. So the boards are pretty similar, I would say.
Here's the thing, though. The one thing I think that is different with Necromunda that I think is significant is so in the original, you basically play on a 4x4 board. That's the norm.
Yep.
At least in the community edition, I think we talked about how looking at some of the art, it seems pretty clear that they used to play on smaller boards. But when it came to the community edition, the idea was to play on a 4x4 board. For the Necromunda 2017, the actual original box game was not played on a 4x4 board. It was played on a much smaller board with tiles. And the idea was, the original Necromunda, the idea is you're supposed to build up and there should be a lot of planks and gangways so you can shoot down and stuff. In the original in the 2017 version, it was released using a flat, like, what do you call it? Like a board game board, right? Where you'd have tiles and you'd kind of lay them out, and where there are no tiles, the idea was that you're in corridors and things like that. So was that called
Zone Mortalis?
Zone Mortalis, yeah. And so the game, when you play Zone Mortalis, is a lot more tight, and like you're playing indoors basically, right? You're playing into and so the game is set up in some ways. Technically, the game is actually set up to play in those corridors first and foremost. And then, because people love the original Necromunda with the larger kind of things, shooting from gangways, they added in this extra thing. I think it's called Sector Mechanicus, where you have larger 4x4 boards, which is, I guess, more normal or more normal for people to get into the game. And technically, if you by just the rule books, you probably are more likely to be able to play Sector Mechanicus because you don't have specific boards to play the Zone Mortalis stuff because you need to buy those box sets, or I don't know, buy third-party things to create those. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to make your own train, you're not going to make the Zone Mortalis very specific layouts. You're going to just make buildings and stuff and play the Sector Mechanicus more open format.
Yep. And so then we get to the actual missions.
Yeah, so the missions, I think the biggest difference, well, we played Dark Uprising, and honestly, the missions were like unbalanced and nonsensical. But I'm sure the ones in the base book are
clearly not play tested. Yeah,
they're just not play tested because there's certain things you could do that would just break the missions. Quite obviously, if you tried to abuse the scoring systems and everything else like that. But
if you played it by what it tells you to do, the actual scenario doesn't work.
Yeah, but what I think the bigger difference, because the original missions I'm sure are much better tested versus the Dark Uprising missions. The big difference I saw is that sort of in the community edition, you would often show up with your whole warband. Some of them, sometimes you don't, but often your whole warband just like takes the table. Whereas in the 17 version, often you have like a choice selection, a random selection of so a fraction of your warband will show up. So that I found was quite a big difference.
So basically, they kind of tried to confine the size of your warbands using this kind of limited insertion rules, which I think is pretty cool. Like, oftentimes, with the Old Necromunda, if your warband is huge and you show up with your entire warband, that's a huge advantage, right?
Yeah, like there's things that can negate it, or at least like balancing mechanics we can get into later. But like it is obviously like there's having the number of guys specified is a limiting mechanism for the difference between the warbands. Like we'll get into the power level difference later, but
and in general, and in general, you basically just rolled up a random mission and then you played them, which they were basically the same in that kind of aspect.
Mm-hmm. I guess like at the very bottom line, not showing up with potentially like over a dozen dudes in the mission means the game will play faster because there's just less stuff to go on.
That's a really good point.
So I see that as sort of a decent choice they made with the new version to like keep the numbers down because it's a skirmish game. So, and it might be played on that Zone Mortalis thing, or the Zone Mortalis, which is quite a small board, so you wouldn't want like 15 guys showing up in the corridors.
It could be crazy, but it could also be really bad for you if someone took a flamer or a blast markers and just killed all your guys as they tried to enter.
Yeah, so there's good reasons for why I think they did that in the new version. So, all right. Those are the missions. We talked about the tables. Are we now getting to the movement?
Yes. Now we get to the actual gameplay. Activation.
So activation, yes, we haven't got to moving yet. We're getting to activation. So if you've listened to us before, we've talked about like I go, you go systems and alternating activation systems for that. Do you want to just give the brief overview of that again?
Yeah, sure. So I go, you go is where I activate all of my guys, so every single one of my guys on the table before then on my turn, and before it passes to you, and then you activate all your guys. Alternating activation or integrated turn is where during the round, basically we take turns activating guys. So I might only activate one of my guys before then you get to activate one of your guys, and then it goes back to me where I activate one of my guys again, right? And we go back and forth. And the big difference is like generally when you go I go, you go, you can kind of have a more, everyone moves together, but it also can, if there's too many guys and too many activations, it can feel a little bit like Rochambeau, where I'm throwing a haymaker at you, doing all my shots, fighting you, and then you do throw a haymaker. If you survive, your remaining guys can throw a haymaker at me. When you're alternating activation or integrated turn, it feels more like a back and forth kind of fight, where one of my guys shoots, and then one of your guys, takes sneaks around and gets the jump on one of my guys before one of my guys reverse jumps back onto your guy and that kind of thing. So what's interesting is one of the versions is I go, you go, and one is alternating activation.
Yeah, we've talked before about how we really like alternating activations, but in this version, like I guess just how war games worked before, like older war
Uh-huh.
games, were like, no, of course you do everything at once, then your opponent does everything at once.
Mm.
So
Yep.
the community edition is based on the original version, and it's basically you move all your guys, then you shoot with all
Hmm.
your guys, and then it goes into the combat phase, and then your opponent
Hmm.
moves with all the guys, shoots with all the guys, then goes into the close
Yep.
combat phase. And then the
Yep.
new version is alternating with sort of the twist where your gang leader and then your champion, like you activate your leader and then you can activate at the same time a bunch of guys around him. And then your opponent activates his leader, a bunch of guys around him, and then it goes back and forth champions, and then the rest of your guys, which it's kind of I
Go
like the
back and
mechanic where
forth.
you activate like a bunch of guys in clumps often just to make the turn go a bit faster. So
Yep. Yeah. So I think the one thing that we kind of we play Frostgrave a ton, and that's the kind of activation that happens in that game, and it does help kind of give the ability of feeling like you can group activate and kind of have a cohesive plan, which is one of the strengths of I Go You Go, while also not having it feel like such a haymaker and having some counterplay going on. How? Yeah, so that's the general activation. Um, Now, because of that, though, because back in the day, almost all the games during that period of time, 1995, where I Go You Go, um, they did have the game plays differently, and they did have ways to mitigate it. So it doesn't necessarily feel like you're just you do nothing, you just get hit, right, and then the other opponent goes and like does a haymaker. So even though it was I Go You Go, I don't
mhm.
think it felt like uh, Warhammer 40,000, right?
No.
Because you're playing in places where you can, because of the terrain and things like that, there are mitigating things, and we can get into that later.
Yeah, it's not like you've lined up on one side of the board, your opponent's lined up on the other side of the
Yes.
board with just like a firing line, and you all just like fire, and
Yeah.
then you start
They're
reloading, and
surviving
then they
guys.
fire at you,
Yeah.
and whoever's left gets to come back and shoot. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's my turn. We'll all shoot our guns. It's not like
Yeah.
that because only a few guys usually see each other at one moment because how
Hmm.
you're like crawling through more dense terrain,
Yeah.
which if you build the
Yeah.
board right, that's how it should go.
There's a bunch of abilities that allow you to mitigate those kind of things.
Yeah, so
So
I think we
yeah,
can get into that in the movement part.
sure. So the next thing is movement.
Mm-hmm.
So in the new game, when you activate, uh, you actually, when you choose a guy to activate, they do their full thing, which is they move and then they fight, right? Don't they, or do they not?
I have this quick reference card in front of me. And I think quick reference cards are actually like quite helpful because when you go back and forth between different games
Yeah,
and have
sorry,
them
I
all.
got confused,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm
Yep.
doubting myself.
Yep. So, as it says, under the action phase, starting with a player with priority, players take turns picking one of their ready fighters to activate. All fighters may perform two actions, simple and basic actions. So, there
Yeah.
you go. So, you perform a simple action and a basic action with that whole
Hmm.
fighter. So, you then shoot.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah, I was getting confused with Kill Team, but yeah,
Yep, that's why you need these quick start sheets. Just
very
be like,
important to have them on every
what
game.
game
Yeah.
are we playing right now? I don't even know, especially when you've played like multiple editions of the same game.
Oh my god. Honestly, now we play so many different games that
Mm-hmm.
you do need those sheets to help refresh things. And sometimes you just end up melding games together by accident.
Yep. Not that can make a bad game, but you know.
It maybe makes the best game.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyhow, so the movement. So in both, you can sort of make that double move thing,
Mm-hmm.
or which is basically like running. So you can run in both games. But when it comes to charging, your charge
Mm-hmm.
distance in the community edition
Yeah.
is you just get your full double movement. You get to the guy,
Yep.
you can fight. When it comes to the 17 version, I think it's
Uh-huh.
based. I think the version of Warhammer at that point was giving you random charge distances. So you get your base movement, but then plus D3 inches. So you don't necessarily, like, even if you're good at gauging distances, you're not really sure if you're going to get your charge in the new version. So when you think you might, like, you have your plan, and if you're not like super close to the dude and you've got to make like a charge that's 8 inches or more, you're getting into, like, your chances of getting that off aren't guaranteed. It's like if you're like 8 inches, well, your movements change too. Like, so it may not necessarily be 8, but once the further and further you start getting from your opponent in that possible charge range, the less likely it is to go off. So you can find yourself just like hanging in the wind and just getting blown away.
Yes,
a lot of the time.
Because you failed your charge.
Because you failed to make the charge. Versus if you kind of are okay at gauging distances, you'll get the charge off in the community edition.
The other thing you can also do, even though I guess it's not part of the rules, is just allow pre-measuring. Yeah. And then everything becomes very obvious what you can do or what you can't.
Yeah, then you know you're taking a risk that you might not make it there.
Yep.
So the charges are quite different in the two games. And then other movement things, which comes down to, well, I don't know what it really comes down to, but in the community edition, you can like move to a spot that's in sight of an opponent, but as long as there's some way your opponent if you're near terrain and there's some way that guy could be seen as like hiding behind the terrain and not totally visible, you put a hiding token next to him and that guy's hidden, he can't be shot at, but he can't shoot in the same turn, he can't run in the same turn he goes into hiding, which lets you sort of like advance your guys towards each other without someone being worried, oh, my guys are just going to get blown off the board if I move into like your good shooting range first. Which
I think it's really a great, simple mechanic. And it was actually one of those mechanics that they brought back for Kill Team 2nd Edition. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, you can hide.
Yeah, except they like...
This is like an old mechanic that often was very, I don't know, from the first kind of skirmish game that, one of the first skirmish games that Games Workshop created.
Yeah, like the mechanic relies
to be fair,
on
it's a great mechanic.
Yeah, the mechanic relies on you having sort of like an agreement. It's not a fixed hard, like if you only see 1/3 of the model or less, it can be in hiding, and here's all these measurement devices. It's like, if you think it's possible, it's possible. Whereas in Kill Team, they have very specific rules that surround like the terrain type and your distance from the terrain and all sorts of things. They made it very hard, explicit, and not just like thematic. And
I guess the idea is that they're trying to make it explicit so that it kind of helps you understand what they're thinking about hiding. Whereas in the older versions, everyone might have played hiding and what considers hiding slightly different, but in some ways that is easier to get into, even though they're not kind of shepherding you so that everyone in the world plays the same type of game. It's a lot easier just to agree with your friends who are playing how you're going to treat hiding, and then you all do it, as opposed to you all just get an intuitive version, as opposed to try to read this very technical manual so that you all have it perfectly the same, so that if you go fly halfway across the world and play with a stranger, you guys are playing with the exact same rule set, right? Back in the day, nobody did that because there was no internet and people didn't travel. Apparently planes didn't work and stuff, so you would just be playing with your friends, so it didn't matter that your version was slightly more vague than the version that someone played, halfway across the world. And because it was vague, you guys just figured it out, and it was in many ways easier just to go out and play it than it is when you have everything super detailed. So it's just interesting overall how people used to write rules versus now.
Yeah, I kind of liked it. So I mean, I'm not looking at this as like a hardcore war game. It's a campaign game. So having like fluffy rules like this, it kind of fits the setting. So I'm not against that.
Especially now, considering this is the old version of Necromunda, who you're going to end up playing with. It's probably just going to be a bunch of friends where you can just work it out.
Yeah, you're not gonna. There's no official tournament scene for a community game.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm all right with that. Any other movement stuff you think are worth bringing up?
Those
are the big ones that.
I guess the big thing is in the old game, there was something called Overwatch, which is not quite movement, but it's kind of like the absence of movement. So if you don't move, you can go into, so you don't move and you don't shoot, you forfeit both. You can go into Overwatch, which allows you to basically react to people on their turn. So on your turn, you don't activate that guy, and then you turn them to face a certain direction, which is, I believe, a 90-degree arc.
Yep.
And if anyone moves across that 90-degree arc, you can take a shot interrupting their movement with your Overwatch. Yeah.
Yeah, you take a bit of a negative penalty, but it means that, like, it kind of, even though the game's I go, you go, like we talked about at the beginning, the fact that you can shoot back before they shoot you if you use the Overwatch option, like, you're not shooting as well as they shoot, but it means you're not so worried that, like, they're going to do everything and you're going to do nothing. It feels like you have ways to create choices for yourself on your opponent's turn, so you don't feel like you're just sitting there doing nothing during their turn. So.
Yeah, so you actually aren't not doing nothing, or you are doing something on their turn. You can set it up, like postpone your action so you can do your action on their turn, which helps keep the game interactive, along with the hiding, like we mentioned.
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like that almost informed Infinity that we play a lot, because in Infinity, you shoot back, but you don't shoot back quite as well. The mechanics are different, but I feel like that created like a precedent. Anyhow, so the new version has Overwatch as well, but it's like a special skill for only some people. So
yeah, I think you either have to. I think it's just a skill you can get on as one of the abilities you can get. It's like Overwatch. Otherwise, most people don't have Overwatch. But because it's alternating activation, you still can feel like you're activating in between, right? So there is a back and forth still going on.
Yeah, they bring a guy out and shoot one of your guys, and you're like, oh yeah, I'll bring one of my guys out and shoot him back, and then it goes back and forth of that. So you have ways of reacting that you don't need the Overwatch quite as badly when you have alternating activations.
Yep.
So I guess we've moved into the shooting. So a big part of shooting in both of the games is the pinning mechanic.
Yeah, it's almost like what makes Necromunda, in my opinion.
Yeah. So because you're not playing with super soldiers, when you get shot, it's kind of not cool. So your guys basically like fall over, and even if they're not like necessarily injured, they stumble for cover, or they like hit the ground or whatever. So they call that pinning. And basically it affects how your guys activate next. So in the go for it.
Yeah, so for both games, right, you roll to hit. The entire kind of shooting thing is you roll to hit with your dice, then you roll to wound, and then you roll if you have a save. Then if you fail your save, then you become you take a wound, and you basically you're downed, and then when you're down, you're basically out of action, but every turn you can roll a dice to either get back up or die.
Yep, so you can go out of action. You can take a serious injury, or you can take a flesh wound. So out of action is when they're basically dead.
Yeah. And
the flesh wound kind of just screws up their characteristics, and that's the same in both games where you take the flesh wounds cause characteristic reductions, but you still get to fight on. It doesn't quite affect your next act. Like you can activate next more easily without having to get back.
Yeah, so what that ends up meaning is that the last kind of thing, if you ever played 40K, like there's a lot of rules, as you can notice, and so that when you take a shot at a guy, there's a lot of states that can end up. Like you can miss entirely, or you can hit them and you can pin them so that they rush for cover, which is quite common. So if you don't wound them, they just rush for cover, right? Or fall down, right? And they're kind of stunned for that round. Or you can wound them and they can go down where they might come back later on, or then you could also then kill them, right? So there's a lot of different states, and that kind of is an interesting gradient when you take a shot at a guy. Sometimes you might take shots at guys just to pin them, to knock them down, even if you're not necessarily likely to kill them with those shots.
Yeah, so the 17 version like makes you take another step immediately, which is checking what their lasting injury is as soon as they go out of action. Which at first I sort of liked, because like, oh, it's really thematic, and you get to like you get to
See if they die or
know
not.
you get to know what sort of wound they just got hit with, so it felt really themey. But then after playing it for a while and then playing the community edition, I realized it's just a lot more like it's just more rolling to get to an outcome, and it's just because it just interrupts things because you've got to write this down as well. It's something you have to keep track of. This not tokens. You have to keep track of what's just like the permanent state that guy's been changed. So after playing a few games of each, I think that the community edition, where once your guys are out of action, at the after game state, you then check what happens with their lasting injuries. So
yeah, I feel like the after the game state thing and checking is a lot more. In some ways, it's more thematic because in the heat of battle, when someone guy goes down and is clearly not going to help with the battle, you're just going to push on, right? Because you're in the middle of a firefight, right?
Yep.
Whereas in the one where you have to roll immediately to see like if they're dead or if they just have a hurt arm or if they're totally actually generally will be able to recover, right? It's weird because you feel like you're shooting, your buddy dies, and then you run over and you check, you do their pulse and all these kind of things, and it's like, oh, he's dead, Jim, right? While the guys are still shooting. That's what it almost feels like. Whereas the other way around, it's like that guy goes down and you're just like, oh, Bob, kill them kind of thing, right? How dare they injure Bob or whatever. And then you check later on to see, did Bob actually make it out alive or not after all the things. So yeah, I enjoy that. I agree.
So having it after, I think having it after is preferable. It's just like, it's more of an interruption and it slows the game down.
Yeah.
So community edition wins on that version.
Yep. And I guess the big thing, like we said, with the pinning kind of mechanic, it's actually slightly different as well.
Yes. Where the pinning in the 17 version, they shoot you on their activation and say your guy hasn't activated yet that turn. He's pinned.
Yep.
So he's only able to take he's not able to take the activation.
One action or something?
Yeah. But he's able to stand up. But he loses, if you want to shoot, he's not able to move, but he can stand up and just shoot back at the same guy. And then the other guy will then fall down. And then probably on his turn, he'll get back up and shoot back at you. So it's, I don't know. I'm not huge on how that was working. Yeah. It felt kind of like you're locked in once you start having that happen. You're just like, well, I got up, I'm going to shoot you. What's going to happen on your turn? Well, this is basically going to play itself out without me choosing too much of this until somebody just dies or somebody else jumps into the fight.
Yeah,
so,
whereas in the original Necromunda, if you get knocked down on your turn, if there's no one around you, you just scramble 2 inches to... That's it. Your entire turn is to scramble 2 inches.
Yep, and at the end you can get up, but you can't just stand up and not go anywhere and shoot. It's very, very different.
Yeah, but unless you have a normal ganger within 2 inches of you, which allows you to make a test to stand up at the beginning instead of the end, and the test involves initiative, which I really like because when you're playing the game, you have a bunch of stats, and oftentimes initiative in that stat block is underutilized. But I feel like in Necromunda it matters a lot because if you get pinned and it's very, very good to not lose your activation that round. So having a high initiative actually feels kind of good.
So I feel like the winner of those two versions of the pinning, like this being stunned rule, I really like the community edition much better on that one.
Yeah, and then on top of that,
because I was playing Corpse Grinders who are close combat oriented in the 17 version, your guys have to walk towards your opponent, then they get hit, and they fall down. And then they can't get up and do much of anything other than just get shot again. So that did not work out very well, that rule, when you were trying to play a more close combat-oriented faction.
Yeah, whereas in the original Necromunda, there are close combat-oriented factions, but they're because like we said, all the stats are basically the same, and it's just their abilities. It's not that you are only close combat. It's that you lean to be better at close combat, whereas other factions, it's basically half the factions are better in close combat, half the factions are better in shooting, right?
Yep.
In the old one. In the new one, there's Corpse Grinders didn't even exist, but they're even further into fighting in close combat, right?
Yeah.
So then just the difference. Well, first of all, I don't even think the factions are really that's in terms of their play style. Like the new models look great and they look like the old ones mostly, but the play style seems quite different than how they played in the old one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some guys can get more flamers in the old version, which I think would make them play a fair bit differently. But other than that, I didn't see a difference where until later on you'd start being really different.
Yeah, like you're talking about in the old Necromunda, they're not there's differences, but it's not as pronounced. Whereas in the new one, they're so different, right?
Yep.
Which, in some ways is a very good thing for some people, right? Some people want to have that super special snowflake thing where, like, I chose my faction, so it's going to be totally different than yours because you chose your faction, as opposed to, some people are like, you have the base thing, and then it's through playing games, your faction differentiates itself from your opponents, right? Through the kind of skills and wounds that they take. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that after the game part later for how you start building towards that. All right, so is there anything else we want to talk about for shooting?
Yeah, I felt like one of the big things is that in the new Necromunda, the weapons that you can actually choose are so much more powerful than the ones that you can have in the original Necromunda.
Yeah, and also like the point balancing in the Community Edition, I think they did some point balancing and some rule changes on things like flamethrowers to bring things more like into balance. Whereas in the new version, there were some things that were definitely like way better for weapons.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that is technically the non-balancing of the weapons. Maybe it's roughly the same in both versions, original versions that were released by Games Workshop. But the benefits for the old version is that you can play the Community Edition where, through the many, many years, remember this game is like, over 25 years old, through the many balances of the game, they've kind of tweaked the weapons so all the weapons have some use.
Yeah, and they're worth their point. You feel like they're worth their point value. They have exactly. A case where you'd use them.
Yeah, exactly, right?
So the one thing
that was actually not the case in this book. Some weapons are garbage.
Yeah.
Right? Some weapons you're like, why would I take that? This weapon is clearly better, right? Yeah, and then so it's the same thing in the newer one, but the other issue is that because, like we said, the game is supposed to start like halfway through. A lot of the guns are way too strong, right? Yeah. It kind of balances out the fact that your champions and your leaders start super strong by allowing you to much more easily buy super strong weapons to put them down like dogs.
Yeah.
Which was actually not the case in the original Necromunda, I feel like. The original Necromunda, you could get really strong weapons. Here's another big thing. You only have 2 guys who can take heavy weapons in the original Necromunda. Like, literally, no matter how big your squad is, like we said, you can have like a 20-man gang.
No matter how much cash you get.
Yeah, you can have a 20-man gang, but they're going to be running around with, like, las guns or maybe bolt guns at best. Whereas, and only 2 guys can have something like a flamer or a plasma cannon or a missile launcher, right? So you only have 2 guys in that. Whereas, I guess there is a limit. But isn't there more? You can have more. I just felt like you'd have way better weapons. Maybe it's just the power level of the weapons are stronger. Like,
so
yeah.
Okay. So with the weapons, that also brings us to the ammo rolls, which I almost forgot. So both games have ammo rolls, except in the Community Edition, you roll a 6, which is cool for you because you hit, probably.
Yeah, when you roll to hit, the ammo roll,
versus the Community Edition where you have to then roll your ammo dice. I've got the ammo dice sitting there, but...
Yeah. So basically, it's a little bit different. It's like the original Necromunda, if you ever roll a 6 to hit, then you make an ammo check, right? Which is generally 4 and up. Whereas in the N17, whenever you shoot, you roll an ammo dice, which tells you whether you need to reload or not. So you're rolling more dice on every shot. I kind of really like the old version. It's just a lot cleaner, and it also makes it feel not quite as bad to run out of your ammo, because whenever you run out of ammo, most likely you've also hit the guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's very possible in the newer one to like unload your ammo and like have no ammo. So when your ammo is out, your gun's basically is your gun useless in the new one, or you can reload in the new one?
You can keep trying to just jam new ammo into it. Which, if you've got really good guns, you're like, ha ha ha, I'm gonna eventually reload this thing and shoot you again.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other version, you're like, oh, if you have really good gun, even if your opponent shows up with really good guns, they might just jam them and be like, ah, crap, now we're back to our stub pistols.
Yeah, exactly. You got to just throw that gun away. I think it's actually called ammo jam, right? It's not out of ammo. It's not you run out of ammo.
It malfunctions.
It's that it's malfunctioned, and in the heat of battle, you're not going to have the time to like, fix that, right? So you throw away that gun. You got to pull out your secondaries.
Yeah. So I like that version. I like the old version on that one better.
Yeah.
Just because it's not as feels. I don't know.
They both feels bad. Yeah. Oh yeah. But at least you hit the guy, so the guy's at least pinned, right? When you hit the guy when you run out of ammo, as opposed to the other one, where you could have missed everything, done nothing, and then your gun is jammed, and you're like, okay, well, whatever.
And then he stands back up and he shoots you in the face.
Yeah.
So. And
then it also feels good in some ways because the impact of running out of ammo is a big deal. Mm-hmm. That gun is done for that game, right? So running out of ammo also feels definitive and important.
It feels more thematic too. Just like you're not like properly armed soldiers. You're stupid gangers who have like crappy. Yes. You don't have like well-made rounds of ammo in nice clean boxes. You've got a bunch of like things. You're like, maybe this isn't even like a bullet. I don't know, but I'm gonna stick it in. Let's see what happens.
Exactly.
The gun's just like,
it just feels right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It makes it feel like the game that you're expecting.
Yeah. So they're both okay, but I do prefer the community edition version of the weapons on that one. All right, anything else for shooting that's like a big thing to mention? I don't know.
No. Well, yes, actually, one last thing is, so in the new one, there were for blast marker weapons, you can kind of choose points and shoot those. And so there were a bunch, and there's a lot of different weapons where I felt like the flamer, for example, is just like how you resolve hitting someone with a flamer is overly complicated. So I just felt like
version?
N17, the newer version. I just felt like a lot of things were like overly complicated, and especially the blast marker stuff, it wasn't super clear. So I feel like everyone, and unlike, some of the hiding things, it was unclear in a way that could be abused. Yeah. So it's possible. So we actually ended up having to play already add like house rules just to get the blast markers to work and make sense. Because otherwise you can always just target a point and then
shoot guys behind walls. Yeah,
shoot guys behind walls without the need to like roll to hit. And maybe that was the point. But if that's the case, like those type of weapons are really strong because they basically didn't get cover, and that means they're really cheap for how good they were.
Yeah, so. Yeah, that was one thing that didn't feel so good with the new version.
Yeah.
All right. So then I guess that brings us to close combat, doesn't it?
Yep. So the original Necromunda, I really enjoy the close combat for that. So it is opposed rolls. So basically both you and your opponent roll dice, and you're trying to roll better than your opponent. So it feels like, even though it's, again, I go, you go, when it comes down to melee, you can still die on your turn because you flubbed the attack roll, right? So when you
don't just attack someone, it's not like a kung fu movie where you're like, oh, it's my turn to attack, and everyone else will stand around and watch me make my kicks, and you'll stand there, and then you'll make your like triple kick back at me when it's your turn. Yeah. You both.
Yeah, so you both kind of go at it, and so you roll a dice, and this is actually the fighting mechanics of second edition, which, if you ever played second edition Warhammer 40k, it was kind of weird because it was really, really detailed, the close combat attacks, and second edition kind of became like a larger game, like a, I don't know, a platoon level, like you have 50 guys fighting, and it was kind of way too detailed, the combat system, but it's actually perfect for skirmish. Yeah. So what you do is if you charge, both of your guys have weapon skill, and if you charge or you do a bunch of things, you get bonuses to that. So the first guy who charges in gets a bonus to the weapon skill +1. And then you roll a bunch of dice and add it to your weapon skill. So both of you, right? Mm-hmm. And whoever has the higher, or the difference between your totals is how much the guy with the higher total hits the the other guy. So it's possible so in general, if you roll a lot of dice, you have high weapon skill, you will generally kill the other guys. But it's possible that you could flub the roll, and you roll a 1, and the opponent rolls like a 6, and they just like bonk you over the head and hit you 3 times or something like that. And it's especially interesting because the more dice you have, it's better because you're more likely to roll high. But every 1 is actually, instead of it adds 1 to your opponent's roll.
But you can also roll 6s that give you add-ons.
But you can also roll 6s to add on. But technically, if you roll 2 dice, you can roll lower, right? You can roll 2 1s, which gives your opponent 2 +1s, but you only add your highest roll, so you're still only getting +1. Mm-hmm. So technically, it's possible the more dice you roll, the worse it can actually the bottom roll is, like the most sad roll that you roll can be. So it's actually kind of interesting that way, and it can kind of have a surprising and dynamic results based on that. And then they have a kind of interesting outnumbering mechanic where the first guy you fight gets no bonuses, right? So if you outnumber a guy with 3 guys, that the guy who's just got charged by 3 guys has to fight each person almost like one-on-one. So in that way, it kind of is like those martial arts movies,
where one person goes in, the next person goes in.
Yes,
but at least it gets harder every time.
That's the entire thing. The first hit, you're like, he's ready for you, right? And so he gets you fight them normally. The second guy that fights gets +1 dice to roll and +1 weapon skill, and so on and so forth. So like, it's technically actually possible for one guy, if he's really good and really lucky, he could actually kill all 3 guys that he fights. But chances are, the more the fights go on, the more he's going to lose. So I just find it's just like it might not be as realistic, but it sure is fun.
Yep.
And it makes an interesting thing where you're choosing, like if you charge 3 guys in, you got to choose the order that you want to roll it. You roll them. Like, do you want to use your best guy first, so you have the highest chance of everyone surviving, or do you want to use like a crappier guy to fight first to take the heat, so that your better guy gets the bonus, so he's way more likely then to finish the job.
Yeah, you're like, I don't want him to get scratched. Like, I want him to like easily just like smack the guy down.
Smack the guy and kill them, yeah. So it's a fun thing. As opposed to the Necromunda 2017, which is, I think, maybe one of the weakest of the base rules. But yeah, let's go through that.
Yeah, so whoever attacks first, it's first. That's all there is to it. It doesn't matter if you're fighting some super elite guy with like high weapon skill, multiple attacks, tons of swords. You're like, oh well, my little Jew with his little pistol and his knife just ran to you first, so you just stood there. And how about you just let him stab you until it's your turn.
Yeah. So if you can survive his shots, then you can attack back.
Mm-hmm. So, and however many hits because you have like your number of attack dice, and however many just succeed based on your skill, not based on their skill, that's the number of hits. Yeah, so it becomes a Rochambeau thing, and the issue is with the difference in power level of attacking, right? So it's one of those things where generally, like, a champion or a leader can survive getting charged by a gang or whatever, right? So they can fight back. And a ganger against a ganger, who wins? It's possible that you can survive even if you got charged first, right? Mm-hmm.
But it becomes really weird when like people at champion level fight other champions because melee weapons are so strong that it's basically whichever champion charged first, even though the champions have lots of defensive abilities, most likely striking is so strong that the guy who strikes first is probably going to kill the other guy.
Yep.
And way more than shooting, actually, right? So it just becomes, and if you pin a guy, right, if you knock the guy down, then they just die, right? Because then you just finish them off, I think. So like, unless there's multiple guys, right? But because it's like multiple people charging, it just is like.
If you can get a big charge off, then like you might eliminate a huge chunk of their army.
Yeah, and because melee is so strong, like it just feels like if you have two melee guys who are standing at each other, who are like two really powerful melee guys, instead of feeling like you have these titans clashing in close combat, it's basically whoever gets the charge in wins. So if you get to go first, it's not exactly 100%, but it's like it's really high chance that if you go first, you just win that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the results didn't.
It actually felt really bad.
Yeah, the results felt really bad usually. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then you're like, okay, so I guess my melee guy doesn't want to be near your melee guy, or because otherwise whoever charges first wins. I don't know. It just felt stupid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it didn't feel very fluffy. Is what it didn't feel like. It felt very like you're just trying to play the mechanics of the game in 17.
Yeah.
So. All right. Anything else?
Did you get the fire back when you charge a guy too? Like an Overwatch shot? Or am I then confusing games again?
Close combat, turn to face. This is in the close
combat.
For
charge.
That's not going to be here. That'd be useful. That's not going to be on this sheet. I seem to recall guys getting shot on the way in, though. Anyhow.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no shooting modifier for when you're being charged. Because in the new version, when you get charged on Overwatch, there's a modifier. But there's no shooting modifier for coming into combat, at the very least. I feel like I really wish, that was here. But, that is
all right.
Well, it's useful. This is not the most useful quick start sheet, honestly, that they've made. You want to go find your own if you play the new version.
Yeah. So, I didn't really like the close combat in the new one. It felt too much, like I said, binary and
Mm-hmm.
And not epic. It didn't feel epic.
No,
unless you want the initiative roll. Is there initiative roll?
Oh yeah. So the other thing we're going back to the turn structure in Community, you just go back and forth, turn to turn, like But in 17, you could have 2 turns in a row, because if you go you don't necessarily know who's going first that turn. Because you've got to roll off against each other for priority every single round. Mm-hmm. So if you think you've got something lined up, you might actually not. Like if you bring your guy into charge range of your opponent, it might just be his charge because you roll off against each other. He gets the priority. Yeah. So randomly, it's his charge, and then he wins because he attacks your leader first. So that just ties into it just feels bad getting that charge off because you don't really control it as much as you think you do, because
it's a lot of initiative rolls and stuff.
Turns come down to that initiative roll for turn in 17.
Yeah, because of the way that the close combat kind of thing works. And then there's the other I guess there is some sort of balancing, is that you can have I guess the next thing we talk about related to that is that in the new one, there was an additional add-on, which has become, I guess, part of the main game, called tactics cards.
Mm-hmm.
So when you play, you get... Well, I like tactics cards. I think they're cool. I think
they're cool.
In the game that we created, we have tactics cards that are very important in the game. I I feel like they were a little bit pasted on in Necromunda 2017 because technically they were pasted on to the base gameplay of the game. And there were way too many of them because I feel like people just brainstormed different ways that you could have a cool tactics card. And then they're like, all right, print them out because we don't have time to playtest all these kind of things.
We need unique ones for every faction. Create more.
Exactly. And so they were not balanced. And because in the game, you don't get random tactics cards. You're supposed to choose them. So what ends up happening is if you choose them, you're just going to choose the best ones because there are ones that are clearly superior. There's like a handful that are just super powerful. And then it's, again, going back to like having to have the play group that you have, like balance things out yourself. A lot of people have house rules where it's like saying you can't use these certain tactics cards because they're broken.
They're clearly the best ones, yeah.
Yep. So, and one of them is just allows you to win initiative. That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, and some of the missions, like they use it as a balancing mechanic if you're really far behind. Some of the missions give you more tactics cards, which is a very small incremental increase, but it's not huge really because the tactics cards, they're okay, but they don't.
Well, some of them are really powerful. I guess it depends on
how far behind
many
you are.
You get. Yeah, well, how many also tactic cards you get, I guess. If you can use like if your opponent has one tactic card and you have like 10, that's a pretty big benefit.
Yeah, but you got to be really behind for that to happen. Like, it's not going to go so well for that. All right, I guess then we get to like the morale stuff that goes on with the bottling, because once you lose a certain number of guys, that you're
So this. So this is a campaign game, so it's important to know when to flee before you get wiped out, because every single guy that gets knocked out of the game has to make an injury roll. So in both games, you can basically bottle out and leave the battle if you've taken a small number of casualties. I think 25%, right?
Yeah, 25 is the pretty common number for most missions.
Yep. I actually think it's quite interesting and fun. I don't remember. I don't know. You do have to basically check. So if you've taken a certain amount and you want to stay because you're actually winning, it's just you happen to, let's say, lose a couple of guys first, but you know that you're in an advantageous position. You have to take a test. Otherwise, you could just possibly just fail and run off, which I actually like. I think this is one of those things that makes it, in many ways, more fun and also makes the games quicker than, let's say, a game of 40K. Whereas 40K, you're playing five rounds and you play until like or you play until, let's say, your opponent is wiped out. In this one, you're generally not going to play till you get wiped out to a man, because once you've lost 25%, you have to start testing every round to see if you flee. And so it like forces the game to a faster conclusion. And I think this is one of those things that allows, it doesn't let games kind of drag on, right? But even if you end up fleeing when you're in an advantageous position, it feels fluffy and fun as well, because it's like, oh, you broke your cool and you couldn't take the heat kind of thing. And then the opponent, even if they're getting destroyed and they survive somehow because of that and win the day, it feels like a major win because thematically, you guys had more guts. So even though you guys were getting crap beaten out of them, your opponent just broke first. And I've just never had, even it seems like it might be a feels bad, but I've just always it's just always felt so thematic that I've always enjoyed it. If you break off, if you break and run away, against your wishes is what I mean.
Yeah. So in the community edition, like most missions will end once you fail that roll and you bottle, whereas in the 17 version, there's then another step beyond that where all the guys have to start taking cool checks individually if you're trying to stay on the board. Which, it's okay. It means if you really want to keep fighting on, it means not all your guys run off. It's just, it's more going on. So I'm not against it.
I don't think it's necessarily worthwhile.
No. Because you start losing so many guys.
Yeah, you start
And it's
losing a bunch
really
of guys. I guess it does make your individual guys specific cool checks like important.
hmm
But I feel like it's almost there because they split out leadership into a bunch of different stats. Like in the original game, you just have initiative, like you just have leadership, right? Whereas they broke that out, but to make into like what, three different stats, I think, in the newer version.
Yep.
Uh, and so, but that was needless, right? Like it's unneeded granularity. So to me, like you're kind of it's fine just to end it, right? The entire point is to play more games anyways.
hmm
So if you end it quicker and it's sad that you retreated off the table, then just play another game and get revenge.
Yeah, like one dude
Most
can.
likely, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if your guys are running away, one dude's usually not gonna be stupid enough to be like, no, I'm just gonna stay here in the middle of the whole arm, their whole gang, and just be shot up. So I don't know.
Exactly.
It works for the mechanics of the game, where if you're on the verge of winning, maybe you just like do it. So
Yeah, and also I don't know. I just like the fact that it keeps the games shorter into a clip,
mhm.
so that it doesn't. You're less likely to have games overstay their welcome just because you're both stubborn and want to win.
Yeah, it fits
Right?
the setting.
Which,
It's good.
yeah, which is a problem for us as gamers. And maybe I'm saying, I like the old Necromunda because it's forcing me to be a better gamer. But I do like the older Necromunda way of doing it because it forces me to be a better gamer.
hmm All right. Any other like mechanics between the games we want to bring up that we
Before we
felt?
get into the campaign stuff.
Yeah, we don't have to cover every last little individual role thing, but just sort of the big overall mechanics I want to touch on. I think those are
I
the
think
big
we mentioned
mechanics.
everything until like it's just the campaign that's left.
Yeah, the campaign. So the after game
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, so the after game stuff. So that's all, so I think we've went over all of the during game stuff. And I get you might there's a lot of good things in both games on
hmm
both sides, and which one you like, I could see when you're actually playing the game. I could see someone preferring one game over the other, and it not being crazy if you choose, if you have a one-off skirmish game, choosing one over the other. I think when you get into the campaign stuff, there's a little bit more to talk about, and in my opinion, that's really where, in my opinion, my preference swings from one to the other.
Yeah, I think from what we talked about for comparing the rules, like either they're just like a preference thing, or one version's better and
Yeah,
one's better and the other. There's no
yeah.
like clear decisive winner.
Yeah, I would say like Necromunda, the older version, is a lot more streamlined, and especially with the community edition, it's a lot more tight. But I do think with the newer version of Necromunda, especially with the House of Chains stuff, which introduces a whole bunch of gameplay rules, uh, like like we said in the original Necromunda, all the gangs are much more similar. Whereas when you play with all of those house books, which are totally new and were released during COVID, um, each of the factions now plays very differently. Like Cawdor now has like prayers, which give them crazy abilities,
Hmm.
basically for free because of their faith. And then some people get free poison. I think Escher gets like free poison stuff. Corpse grinders, I don't remember what they get. I think they just
They've
get
got
special equipment.
they've got pretty crazy armor to start with, as long as you're facing towards
Yeah,
your opponent.
yeah. Some of the other factions get crazy armor, and then so they're just very different. Now, I would say in a one-off skirmish game, that difference allows you to play like your skirmish games are going to be more, in some ways, more varied and more complicated. But because with the complication, they become more. There's just more stuff going on during the game, and that allows you, that could be interesting to a lot of people, especially if Necromunda is your main game and you play
Mhm.
one-off games with that, and you're like, okay, I want my guys to be like special, super special and different, and play differently when I play my Eschers versus when I play my Cawdor, right?
Mhm.
I think that can really, that's a big strength, even though what it comes with a large amount of mental
Com-
load.
yeah.
Yeah, complication, right? And then I think the other thing is those House of books in terms of the rules for each of the factions and the weapons that you have in the game, they're not balanced.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, the reason why the Necromunda version that we played was balanced, a lot of it is we played a community edition, which explicitly, community members after like 20 years have rebalanced the game. But that's the game you will be playing in general if you play the older version of Necromunda, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you will end up, unless you play a lot with your friends, you have to rebalance the new Necromunda between your friends and put in that effort to make sure that the game, especially when you play a skirmish game, you generally want balanced games as opposed to just having random superpowered equipment, right?
Yeah, when it goes from when it's a campaign, like if someone's clearly better, then it keeps persisting possibly from game to game, which is what we'll get into for the post-game mechanics. So you want the game to be balanced, because then like people aren't going to want to come back for the future games if they're getting crushed and they know they're going to get crushed.
Yeah, and it's just based on the army list that you have, right? So it's good with the community edition of the Old Necromunda in that all the balancing has already been done for you, right? From what we've seen, it's pretty balanced. It's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, it starts off.
All right.
It starts off at a good point.
Yep.
So
anything else
mechanics
about the actual game? Or is that covered basically?
Well, there's tons of things that are different, but I just want to get into like the big things because those affect how the gameplay goes.
Sure.
So post game.
Yep. Post game. Ooh.
So you get XP and you get money, right? That's it.
Yes.
Done, right?
You get XP and money, sure. And it's the same in both ways. Both games, you get XP and money.
Yeah. So
how they go about it is very different.
That different, can it?
Oh my god, it's crazy how different it is. So you get XP from playing the game in both, and then you get XP for killing people in both. So in the original game, I think we said there's Juves, which are the lower level, like new recruits.
Yep.
And then you have gangers, and then you have your champions. And it's basically roughly delineated on how much, like where their starting XP is on a chart. And basically the chart is kind of not...
So you keep track of their total XP they've gained in the original. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so the less XP you have, the less XP it takes to level up, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have the new recruits, it only takes 5 XP to level. Yep. But it takes 10 XP for a ganger to level, and it takes 20 XP for a champion, like for the heavies or your leader to level, right? Just because of where they are in the chart, right? And what that means, the
more XP you get, the less frequent the upgrades start coming.
And so when every game, you actually get D6 XP plus 5 if you kill the guy. And what that means is that your like lower level guys, your Juves, they gain levels like right after your first game, one of your Juves have probably leveled. So you probably get levels every game, right? Yep. Even if you played crappy, just because the game says it gives you D6. And then on top of that, the person with a lower warband rating will always get bonus XP. It starts off at 1 bonus XP if you win, right? But the bigger the difference, the more XP they will get bonuses, right? The last game, I think you lost one of your really good guys, right? So, and your guy was worth like 150, I think?
195.
195. So losing him just by himself meant that the next game you played, you would gain plus 3 XP on everyone who participates. So it's a really big, in terms of XP, balancing mechanic that's going on there. And what it also means is that your guys level a lot every game. So every game you play, you feel like you're improving your warband a lot.
Yeah, even if you lose some guys, you're like, oh, well, the rest of the guys at least are coming ahead.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of kind of evens
Yeah,
it
it's
out.
kind of cool. And then the other thing is the money for the original Necromunda.
Yeah.
So
So it's based on territories in both games.
yep. So when you have in between games, you can send off gangers, which are like the middle guys, right? Which are your most populous number of guys, and you can allocate them if they've survived and not if they've not been wounded. Allocate them.
This is the community edition, right?
Yeah, community edition. You can allocate them to a territory, and then you basically roll on a chart basically to see how much money you got for that territory. But after you've like totaled up your income, then you don't just get that amount of money. You actually look at a chart. So that's your income, and then you have to check a chart that gives you a certain amount of profits based on how many guys you have. So the bigger you've
got mouths to feed here, you know.
Exactly. So what that means is that the more guys you have, the less money you get. So it's another kind of self-balancing kind of mechanic where it's not self-balancing, it's a balancing mechanic where if you're doing really well, none of your guys died, they're kind of leveling up. They just become more expensive like to feed, and you will get less money. Whereas if you lost a bunch of guys and you've dropped down to a lower number of gangers, then you get more money so that you can afford to buy your gangers back, basically, right? Or buy more equipment if you want to keep less guys.
Yeah. It discourages people from building overly large war bands and like trying to swarm your opponent. It's a discouraging factor to that. It's not like you can't do it, but there's a reason not to because your income will drop off.
Yep. And then the remaining income you have, you can either buy equipment or you can go onto look for rare equipment, where you basically every game you can roll, I think D3 plus 1. Or is it just D3? You can basically roll on a chart to see how many items have become available to you, right? So in the market,
you can always buy your basic stuff that was available at the start. But then if you want to start getting cool stuff like armor and other special weapons, then you've got to go to the market for it.
Yeah, and you got to roll, and only a certain number are available to you. So you only get like 3 or 4 options to buy basically after every game. And importantly, like you mentioned, armor is on that chart, which means you will have all your guys have no armor because you guys are a bunch of gangers like scum in the Underhive. Armor is very rare. Guns are plentiful, but armor is rare.
Yep. So that's how community works, more or less. Then we come to the new and improved version, right? They improved it, didn't they?
It's a new version. I will say that. So again, now the interesting thing is all the stuff we mentioned before, a lot of it comes from the basis of the original 2017 game, which was meant to be a skirmish game, not a campaign game, right?
Yep.
And so the campaign is kind of being grafted on top, and I don't know, in many ways it can kind of tell. Now, I don't understand why they just didn't use the old Necromunda campaign rules. But I guess in some ways the main game is so complicated they wanted to streamline this part. So after every game, you still get.
So one thing I guess we should mention, in both you can lose territories.
Yep.
And usually in the old one it depends on the missions.
I think in the new one it depends on the missions too. Yeah. It just seems more likely in the new one. Oh, another thing is I feel like there's less missions in the new one. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but maybe it's because they're broken down into like a small number of Zone Mortalis and a small number of Sector Mechanicus. Maybe if you add both those, there's actually more. But it just felt like there were less missions. But I might just be misremembering.
Yeah. All right. So on to the territories for the 17.
Yeah. Money and XP. I guess the big thing is XP.
Yep.
So instead of getting a level at every 5 or 10 XP that you collect, you actually collect XP and then you spend it on a chart. So in the old one, once you get 5 XP, you basically roll and get a random bonus, right? And you're hoping for the really good ones, like +1 wound or +1 weapon skill or ballistic skill. Yep. In the new one...
Well, it could also be skills, too. You roll, and then it tells you whether you get a skill or whether you get a stat, and then you sort of go down the charts from there.
Yeah. Whereas in the new one, you buy you have a certain amount of XP that you get, and then you can spend it to buy different stats, and different stats cost different amounts. So like if you want to improve your weapon skill, you need, I think, 5, whereas if you just want to improve your initiative, you only need 3. Now, in some ways that's good, except for the fact that the stats are not equally balanced, which I guess is why they have different XP buys. Which means that you're never going to want to spend XP on the crappier ones.
No, and you're going to get the exact ones you want. It's not like your guy sort of organically develops. You work towards min-maxing your dudes. Like if you have a close combat dude, you're taking the weapon skill, you're taking attacks or like wounds or whatever. And if you've got like shooting guys, you're taking the things to help you shoot. They're not. It's not narrative. It's just you going for pure power level on this chart.
Yep. And then the XPs are like really stingy. So like the best way to get XP is if you kill a guy, then you get 1 XP, right? So you play a game, you get 1 XP. You kill a guy, you get 1 XP, right? Which is roughly, I guess, technically equivalent in Necromunda, the original one, right? Because I think if you kill a guy, you get 5 XP, and then you roll D6 if you play the game, right? So it's around 3. So you do get more when you kill a guy. But the big thing is, just rolling a D6 and playing, you will, after a couple games, you'll get a level. The good level ups in the new Necromunda chart are like 5 or 6 XP. Right? If you get 1 XP a game, and you didn't kill anyone, it's going to take like 5 games or
to get a basic
like 3
upgrade.
or 4 games, to get a basic upgrade that is decent, right?
And somewhere like
you're not gonna, you don't want the crappy ones, So like, what ends up happening, and in the old one, Jews get an XP or a level up every 5 XP. Like if they kill a guy, they're getting a level up. In the new one, Jews learn just as fast as everyone else. Well, the champions or whatever, right? I think the gangers need 6 XP to level up, and then they roll on a random chart. But like Jews and champions and stuff like that, they use the buy chart, right? And so they need 6 XP. So you need to kill like 5 guys in a game to get a level up.
Which is insane. Like it's like you won the game on your own. Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's the same chart for leaders versus Jews. So to level up a Jew, you kill 5 guys, you get an upgrade. If your leader kills 5 guys, which is much more likely because your leaders are all bosses, your leaders and champions are like already super buffed, they get a level up too. So it's actually possible for a leader to kill 5 guys in a game, or maybe 2 games, right? And they'll get a level up that matters to them. It's not possible for a Jew to do that. So your Jews take like 5 games or something like that to level up. Yeah. Whereas
you're like, why do I even bring them to the board? Like,
yes, they're so much worse. Whereas you have a sort of runaway issue where if your leader goes out and kills a whole bunch of people because they're your best guys, or your champions with like heavy weapons and stuff do that because they have great weapons, then they will level up. They're much more likely to level up and continue leveling up and pulling away because the main way you get XP is killing people.
Yeah, just as long as they don't kill themselves. So
yeah, exactly. So instead of like, it's almost the opposite. Where Necromunda, everyone's leveling up at a good pace, right? And then some Jews will surprise you. In the new Necromunda, everything is almost resting on the shoulders of your champions and your leader because they're the ones that kill people. So they're the ones most likely to level up. And because of that, they're also the ones who are more likely to be super powerful to continue to kill people.
Yep.
So it's almost like the rest of your gangers are just chumps meant to be killed by each side's leaders champions, right? Or get a lucky shot off or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And if you get a lucky shot off, you don't even level up.
No.
Like if you
go back over whole more games to get your ass kicked. Yeah. So the whole leveling process is not It's just not as enjoyable.
So we're playing, and I was just like, why does it take so many games for these Jews to level up? Because when I heard about Necromunda, we've heard about it for so long since we've been playing since 1995, technically, right? We always heard like, oh, it's great to have Juves because, they level up and they'll become awesome, right? And then I played the new game, and I'm like, no, these guys are like the worst. They have worse stats, and they take forever to level up. Might as well just buy a ganger or buy a champion. Like, if my champion dies, like, just recruit another champion. That's how you should be playing it.
Like, how many games do you have to play in a campaign of Necromunda to make guys, like, serious advance from the lowest level? It's just so many games. You're not going to... It's unrealistic number of games to play to feel like you've, altered your warband. It really just matters where they start.
Yeah, and it's weird because in the rules, it reads that says that Jews, like, learn very fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the actual rules do not show that at all.
No.
They're like, just the gaggers were better. So it's just ridiculous. I feel like there's some sort of, what I feel like it is? I feel like someone printed, like there were two different versions of leveling that used different amounts of XP. And when they printed it, they printed the XP sheet, or like the buying from one sheet, and the how much XP you get from games from the other version. And they accidentally put them the two together, and now that no one just wants to admit that they made a mistake, and that those things don't match. It's ridiculous. Yeah. You can double the XP that they get, and I think you still level slower than the original Necromunda.
Mm-hmm. So back to the territories, though, in the community, the original. Like, you've got to send your gangers to a territory to generate the income, which you mean because you start with 5 territories for your starting band. Maybe you steal some, maybe you don't. But like, if you just make all your guys, if you try and swarm them with a bunch of Juves and you only take 3 gangers, you can only generate income off 3 properties because you got to send those 3 gangers there. Versus the new version, it doesn't matter how you compose your gang. Like, you generate all the income off all the territories, no matter how many guys you have. So if you steal territories from your opponent, you just have more. Whereas if you get one stolen from you in the older version and you only started with 4 gangers, like, okay, we went from 5 down to 4. I'm still getting basically the same amount of income. It's okay. Maybe one of your good territories is gone, but you're not like...
The territories also have buffs. Yeah,
you're not completely out. And like, if your opponent takes something from you, they're like, well, maybe if they only had 3 gangers because they took a bunch of heavies, like me being crazy. And they're like, oh, I can't, like, okay, I have 7 territories now, say, but I only have 3 gangers. My income really hasn't gone up that much.
At all.
Yeah, probably at all. Maybe you got a good territory, maybe you didn't. But
so there is a lot of these things. Yeah,
it holds it back on being like getting crazy income. Whereas 17, your income can turn crazy and your opponents can turn to garbage pretty quickly.
Yeah. So this is one of those things as we played in the new version of Necromunda, especially with the House of books. It just felt like there were not a lot of rebalancing mechanics. And there's actually, instead of a lot of comeback mechanics, right? So if you were unlucky, instead of having those, the new game had a lot of the opposite. It's like win more mechanics, basically.
Yeah, I think we're basically into talking about gameplay now, and I think that is the most important thing to talk about for this game, like getting into the gameplay. We talked about the mechanics down to like the grid of the movement, the activations, but the big part of the gameplay I think we want to focus on is the balancing, because it's something that continues. It's not like you play one game and you're like, oh, that was screwy. How about you just not take that same army again with like all min-maxed one thing? This is a campaign game. If you've gone in and somebody's like got a more powerful army, it's going to persist over a bunch of games. So the game needs like balancing mechanics that go as part of the campaign system.
So that some guy, like... So some guy can't, if they start winning, just like win more and then quickly pull ahead, which is exactly what seemed to happen in the new Necromunda. Like we said, if you win a territory, you lose a territory, right? And it seemed like it was pretty easy, relatively speaking, right? If things just went badly to lose a territory, they're just getting way more money now every every round, and there's no balancing thing. If they have more guys, they're more likely to win. They're more likely to win territories. Then they continue to win more. If they're champions, who are the most likely to level, start killing lots of people, they become even better than possibly your champions. Plus, they have a lot more money because they win more territories.
Yep.
So they continue to get even stronger, so they can kill more people. And they can level up way faster than your champions to get even better at killing your guys. Right? It's just there's no mechanics, or there's very, very few mechanics to help players who are down in the campaign to come back, or to reel back someone who was just shot ahead super far.
Because the whole thing, how the marketplace works, I'm not sure we exactly said it, but in the 17 version, like for the rarer items, like armor and bigger weapons, after the game, like they have different levels of rarity versus like the community. You roll, you see what's sitting around in the market. In the other version, you roll after the game for like the level of rarity that's available at the market. Like, did you go to a blinged out market, or did you go to the kind of a poor market? And just like, if you roll really high, all the finest things are available to you. And if you've got a lot of cash on hand, you can just buy your warband all the finest things when you've pulled ahead. Like to have extra armor levels, to have like way better weapons.
There's no cap on, if you have a lot of money, cap on being able to spend that, right? On super good equipment. So it was just really, it was surprising, and I still feel like we're playing it wrong, and someone's going to come to us and say, listen, no, there's actually balancing mechanics, because it was so important in that Necromunda chart, the underdog bonus. Literally, if you are one, so you calculate your in the original Necromunda and Community Edition, you calculate your warband strength by calculating how much your warband is worth plus their XP, right? And if you are even above by 1 point of warband, the opponent, the guy who's lower, gets 1 more XP, 1 free XP if they win. So like that's a very, very small difference, right? And like you said, if you are like our warbands, if you have a 1500 point warband, right, and the opponent is down by 150, they get 3 extra XP just for showing up if they lose. That's like a 10% difference. And as the game goes on, things will be larger. But because it's not a percentage of your warband, you get XP based on the difference, which means that as your warbands get bigger, the difference can get large, and then the bonuses get very big, even though they're not as much of a percentage of each person's warband, right? So it's a huge balancing mechanic. You even get more income if you're losing. So there's an underdog bonus for if you beat. So for the income bonus, you do have to win. But if you win against the odds, against a stronger warband, let's say there's certain missions where both the opponent and you are limited in number of guys, so you might just be able to luck out and win, even though your warband's rating is much lower. If you even get an income benefit where you get a lot more money.
They're just like, they're fluffy. Like, people love it. All right, they throw you money. They know the game needed that mechanic, so they put it in, even though it might not be exactly like perfectly fluffy. Like, the game needs this, and they put it in.
So in the new Necromunda, if we're playing it wrong, please tell us where there's more balancing mechanics.
Look, there's tactics cards. The tactics cards are
3. You get extra tactics cards. But not that many, do you?
No, it's the mission determines it, but it's not a huge thing.
It's not like you get 10 to 1, do you?
No.
You get extra tactics cards.
So choosing the missions in 17,
you are more likely to choose the missions. Right, you roll on a chart and you're more likely to choose. Which is the same thing in the old Necromunda, by the way. And then the last thing is you can petition help from the upper echelons. That was introduced, I believe, in the house books. Except that those petitions, the guy who's ahead can still roll on that chart. So, and it's a random chart. And the only difference is if you're behind, you can get up to a +3 on that roll. So technically, if you roll badly, your underdog bonus is just a +3 on this chart, and you could get a worse benefit than the guy who's already crushing you. And that seems to be, from what we saw, the main balancing mechanic.
Yep.
And someone please tell us. I scoured those books so much. Maybe I just kept on skipping the underdog bonus chart. But if someone has one, please tell us. It's just crazy that it doesn't have one, right?
Well, the whole income thing is really what drives the difference in the war bands. From what we found,
bonus is huge.
Yeah, the bonus is
huge as well.
Yeah, the XP is huge.
XP is a big deal because the other thing that we kind of hinted at, but from all of the mechanics, if you put that all together, is that because champions and leaders are so important, if, let's say, you had a showdown in one game where your leader fought their leader, and then they rolled well on the initiative and they got the charge, and then they killed your leader, and then your leader dies, that's a huge deal. Because all of your power is in your leader and your champions, right? And because it's a campaign game, they don't come back. You have to buy that leader again, which is a huge amount of money. But let's say you lost your territory, everything is pushing against you from being able to re-get that guy back, which means that that's a huge swing, which allows the opponent, again, combining with everything we said, it's even more of a win more. Whereas in the old Necromunda, because there's a bunch of things that are mitigating that issue, right? You still use your guy and all the equipment, which is really bad, right? But the relative power level of your heroes when you start out is much lower. So if you lose a leader or something at the beginning, you're much less likely to be super far back.
Yeah, the difference between your leader and a ganger isn't so huge. So if you can't buy back a leader and you buy back a ganger instead, it's not the end of the world. Whereas when your guys come in with tons of abilities and their point value is so hugely different in 17 from a leader to a ganger or a juve, you're in trouble if you lose a big dude.
You lose a big guy, and because there's no balancing mechanic, you can't catch up. There's no mechanics to catch up. You lose 150. The way to catch up is somehow your opponent's leader dies. Otherwise, you're just permanently behind 150. And when that leader shows up, he's going to have a huge impact on every battle. He's going to get so much XP because now there's no opposing powerful leader to oppose him. So he's just going to be dominating the field, right? And gaining a whole bunch of XP, which helps snowball, right? There's so many snowball mechanics. It makes me wonder if the playtesting if they ever did any campaign playtesting, playing long campaigns, because everything seems fine if you're playing one-off games, but terrible if you're playing campaign. It's they never even thought about it, or those pages were stuck together in my rule book and I missed them. Which, please, if you played Necromunda 2017 and I missed those, please tell us. Yeah. It's just unbelievable that so many people play this game. Maybe they don't even play this game. Maybe everyone just buys the cool models and assembles warbands and doesn't play it.
That's a lot of what I've heard. People are like, oh, I bought it. And I'm like, but you've heard of what actually happens after you start playing? They're like, yeah. I've never heard of anyone being like, oh, yeah, we keep coming back and playing more campaigns of this. Yeah. People just seem to bounce off of it a lot.
So they assemble it, they play 1 or 2 games, in which case it's fine, like we mentioned. Actually, I would say it's actually a decent skirmish game. There's a lot of cool things that from the original Necromunda, which are in both, right? Lighting guns on fire is fun. Shooting a guy and having them fall, shooting a guy on a balcony and having them fall down and splat on the ground is in both games, super fun. Not in a lot of skirmish games, so that part is cool, right? So it has a lot of cool things, and like you said, you start off with really powerful guys, so the game feels interesting and different, and you have when you play the game. Just when you play the campaign, those, any kind of good rolls or mismatch in terms of luck blows out and snowballs, and then one person will run away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that was balancing, which is a lot of what we need to talk about.
Yeah.
I think we've made the main point about that. So
Yeah.
there's other gameplay things I think we talk about a lot in other podcasts.
Yeah.
So like the most basic of the ones is like the number of rolls needed to like achieve a resolution of an outcome of like when you take an action.
Okay.
Like, because we talk about Frostgrave, we talk about Infinity. You just roll against each other. Frostgrave is one roll. Infinity, you roll a hit, then you roll your armor. So your outcomes, like the game is very like we both like games where you don't have to roll buckets of dice. Like you get to 40k, you roll your bucket. Maybe you do some rear rolls from the bucket, then you got to roll strength versus toughness for that bucket. Then you got to roll some armor saves, and then maybe you do some re rolls. It's just it's too much. Some games can have too much to achieve like an outcome, and it takes you out of the game, and it doesn't feel thematic once you have to make like 7 rolls to have an outcome. So how
the
how
game
do you
stops
feel
being the game. It just starts being just rolling dice
and accounting? Yeah. How did you feel about these versions of Necromunda for that like rolls to get a resolution?
I vastly preferred the earlier version
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like there's just too many different rolls, right? Like we talked about them briefly, but like the ammo roll, right? Like you every single time you shoot in the new one, you roll an extra ammo dice, and that is fine in and of itself. But when that's in every single step of the game, it just adds up. One of the things is the original Necromunda armor is rare.
Exactly. So
you're not
for
going
the
to
most
have it.
part, when you get started, you're not making armor saves. Whereas almost everybody has armor saves in 17, and you've got to look at the AP values of all the weapons. Mm-hmm. So there's like an extra roll to reach a resolution.
Yeah, and Necromunda already has the extra like knockdown rule, wounded roll, which slows things down relatively to the second edition, let's say, right? So it already has those kind of extra rolls. So just limiting it so that only like your really good guys will end up getting armor saves, right? Because it's just rare. Is great to help keep things clipping. And again, it's almost like in terms of the rolling thing, it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts, right? Like or death by 1,000 rolls, basically.
Well, the same thing too. Like there's another cut when you take the guy out of action. Like you're supposed to immediately check his lasting injury in 17.
Yeah.
So like there's too many rolls to get to an outcome in 17, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true.
And are there too many rolls in the basic one, or does it feel pretty okay? It's higher than a lot of games we play.
I actually think that it's okay, but it's not ideal in my opinion. There are still a lot of rolls, and like when you play something that's newer or more streamlined like Frostgrave, I feel like some people feel like it's too few rolls, so that it feels a little bit too random. Because you have a wider variety and it's basically a linear change. So but to me, I like that. It's quick, it's snappy. Like you understand it happens right with one roll, and then everything kind of falls through that, right?
It makes the roll really exciting,
yes, it makes the roll really exciting as well, which is great, right? As opposed to like getting slowed down and saying, okay, then I do 3 rolls and let's see what happens, right? So. Compared to those games, I think I vastly prefer Frostgrave's kind of resolution mechanics. But overall, I think it's fine. I'd say it's still a lot of rolls, but it's achievable and it's fine. I think it's still in that realm. But again, it's going to be different for everyone, right? I think for some people it might still be too much, right? But one thing's for sure, it's a lot less rolls than the new Necromunda, which helped it.
Yeah, the new one's too many. It started getting, it just wasn't very exciting.
Yeah,
at the level you'd expect. So in terms of that, the older version's a big winner. So
yeah, in terms of polish, I think there's no contest like that.
Balance,
community edition,
just balancing
overall polish. Overall polish. I think one of the biggest issues with the new Necromunda, especially with the House of Chains, I think we might have mentioned this briefly, is that the House of Chains, I don't think those were play tested. A lot of them were released during COVID, and I feel like that probably affected the amount of play testing they could do, if there was even any play testing. Yeah. Everything felt like in the new edition. We played also. What was it? What's the version of the campaign that we played?
Oh, Dark Uprising?
Yeah, Dark Uprising, that those missions were like terribly balanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and I played missions before that, right? Like more like one-off games and stuff like that. The game felt fine and actually kind of fun. But when we played more of the campaign stuff, it was just, I felt, and when we played more games, I felt too many rule. I felt like I was playtesting a game. I felt like this wasn't even a beta. This is like an alpha version of a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are some interesting things inside the game. Most of the interesting things inside that game came from the original Necromunda, not from that version of the game. I'd venture to say all of them.
Yeah,
all of the
really.
interesting things. All of the interesting things in the new Necromunda are in the old Necromunda, except unbalanced new versions of them, right? So I was in the new one, right? So I just felt like maybe if there's 20 years down the road, if there's a community edition of the new one, it might be playable.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even think that game is playable. Like, I think I mentioned this before. The new Necromunda is probably the worst experience I've had in a miniatures game when we played the campaign.
Yep.
So not the one-offs. The one-offs were fine, but the campaign was the worst experience I've had in a miniature game in like 10 years. I can't even remember a worse experience I've had playing a skirmish game. Or playing any kind of miniatures game, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Normally we don't like quit. Yeah, the army building, like
even versus playing actual betas of games, just saying. So yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Like we touched on it before, like the army building aspect. Like if people really like building armies and like seeing how they can min-max things.
Yep.
The army building's deeper in the new version, but
why are you playing Necromunda?
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not looking for a campaign game. If you're looking to just like to optimize lists, you're not looking for usually a campaign thing.
Yeah, the Necromunda, the brand,
because you're stuck with your list.
Feeling.
Like you built your list and you're stuck with it for a whole campaign.
Exactly.
It's not about lists. It shouldn't be about listing. If you want
it should be more about the growth of your team, and then also making choices as your team grows, right? That's the entire cool thing about campaigns, right? Or, like we said, grows or dies. So the new version of Necromunda is fine as a skirmish game, but terrible as a campaign game, in my opinion. You're just pulling teeth trying to get fun out of that game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And if you just want a cool kind of skirmish thing, just play a different rule set, please. Play one that's been play tested. Play one that's like at least into beta as opposed to in some sort of alpha rules. Or it's just crazy. And the crazy thing is, the models are amazing. And I feel like a lot of it is...
If the game was even okay, I would love like buying more guys, doing all the conversions, doing all that. But and the cool thing with the old version is that like if you want to min-max, they're like, you must put those weapons on the guy. It's like, sure, you want to build some crazy dude with all the selection of weapons? If you're willing to put the work in to build a guy yourself, sure, try and min-max this game.
Yeah. You can have unlimited weapons in the old game, which you can't in the new game.
Mm-hmm.
But in the old game, you have unlimited weapons, and they're like, okay, sure, you want like, so you can run out of ammo, right? So you want like 10 backup guns? Sure, go ahead, do it. You just have to model those 10 guns in like a long strap along his chest or something, where he just has all of the guns. Yeah. So,
which fits into the more like, I don't want to call it lax, but the just like
more fun, thematic, like I guess just thematic kind of gameplay, right? Where you care more about the experience as opposed to just winning. Right?
Yeah, it fits in the whole thing with the hiding mechanic and that. You're just like, all right, let's just have like a creative idea here. It's like it's about the more like doing something creative in the game and themey versus like just trying to use your points in the most optimal way possible. So
actually coming out of that, I guess I think I already said that. So I already said what I think of the new one. So obviously, I guess, is there anything else before we get to kind of a conclusion, wrap it up? This podcast's been going on quite a while. Apparently we have a lot to say about Necromunda. So
I don't know. I covered my my sheet of notes. I got a much bigger sheet this time. I didn't use a notepad sheet. I had to go full-size paper. I had to go full-size paper on this bad boy.
Okay, so I think at least I've said Necromunda, the new one, is, I gotta say, it's terrible. I hate it. For me. So if you like it, don't come at me, bro. But what do we think about the original Necromunda, or at least the community edition version of the original Necromunda?
Oh, I think it's decently playable as a campaign game. Like,
yeah,
I'm okay.
I actually really liked it.
Like, unlike Stargrave, I feel like the weapons feel futuristic, whereas when we played Stargrave, I felt like the mechanics didn't feel futuristic. Whereas this actually feels like it's the future, and the guns have like cool things going on. So I think
you run out of ammo.
I like it better than Stargrave. Yeah, ammo running out that fits the theme. Like, you know.
So I can see that. I don't know if I love it more than Stargrave, but to me, I would rather play Frostgrave than Stargrave because they're very similar games, except one's in space. So I feel like in terms of my, I don't know what you call it, panopticon of, I don't know if I'm using that word right, but like of games to play, Necromunda would fit into games I would play more than Stargrave. Partially because I painted up a bunch of cool miniatures and I made terrain specifically to play Necromunda, and then I hated the 2017 version. So I really I'm okay and jonesing in some ways to play the original Necromunda because it was fun. It was, it's cleaned up because of the community edition, right? It has interesting things going for it. You got that cool leveling up stuff. Like everything that I wanted from a Necromunda-like game is there, except for maybe events and long-term campaigns, which I don't think are like campaigns like in Frostgrave kind of thing. But like you don't necessarily need that. Like because I just finished
for like a campaign with set orders of missions, rather than choosing.
So
missions.
I like the idea of Dark Uprising in the idea where it's like you're playing a normal Necromunda campaign, but there's like set pieces as certain things are happening in the hive. That portion is cool, but I think if we went over and dug into the large supplemental material for Necromunda, we could probably find that stuff. It's probably there now that I'm thinking about it. So it's just we played the base game. We wanted to try it out to see. It's basically because I played the old Necromunda 17, and I was like, this cannot be the game that all of our friends and stuff were gushing about. This just cannot be like that. And turns out, sure enough, it's not. The original Necromunda, at least the community edition version that we played, is really good. Like cleaned up, seems pretty streamlined. There are more rules. Like it is not a perfect game. Like there's in the past 25 years, we have, in my opinion, improved on making games. But there's the original Necromunda, or at least the cleaned up Necromunda, is good enough that I would pit it against a lot of modern games. And like you said, for you, it comes out on top, right? And against a lot of them. So.
Yeah, so I hope we made the point that if you're planning to play a campaign game with your friends and not quit and not have a terrible experience, don't play the new version of Necromunda as a campaign game. If you just want to play some pickup games versus like Kill Team, maybe you could actually like say, okay, we're going to play this instead of Kill Team as some one-offs.
Yeah.
But you're not looking for a campaign if that's the direction you're trying to go.
I could totally see preferring Necromunda as a skirmish one-off game versus playing Kill Team. I could see it being better.
Yep, I can see that. But that's not what we're talking about today. That's just like if you're looking, if you like the models and you're willing to play it as a one-off, you're okay. But if you
play this version, but the community edition that you can find on Yak Tribe.
It's not even about it being free. Like the free part doesn't matter.
It's free too. I totally forgot that.
It doesn't even matter.
The rules are free. You don't have to pay $100 like I paid, or more than $100 that I paid to play the new Necromunda to have a bad experience, and then immediately sell them back to the store.
Yeah, but go buy two $45 starter boxes. Go buy the $40.
They're not $45 starter boxes anymore. Oh, maybe in American.
Yeah, American. Okay. Go do that. Like. that's fine. GW put out good products for the miniatures. You can support them that way, but you don't have to spend the money on their rules. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, so I guess if you had to buy the old version of Necromunda models or the new version, which one would you buy?
That's not even a question. That's not even worth asking. Okay, no, some people are like, oh, nostalgia, like all the old stuff. I'm like, give me good miniatures. I don't care when they came out.
Yeah. So just so that people don't think we just like old stuff. We definitely prefer the new models. They're super good. That's part of the reason why, we bought in and started playing it, because the models are amazing.
Yeah.
So. All right. So I guess we've made our feelings clear. Play Necromunda Community Edition, free on Yak Tribe with the new models. So sell your 2017 books and just find the free edition of the Community Edition and play that instead. You will have so much more fun. You will actually be able to play with the awesome new models they're continuing to release.
Yep. So it's overall we're positive. There's good things that you can find on this one.
So overall, would you say Necromunda? What do you think of Necromunda as a whole?
Oh, the setting's cool. And I think because the Community Edition's become accepted, and it has like Yak Tribe supporting it, which is like army building tools and everything. Like other games with the Community Edition, people are like, oh, I don't know, this is kind of like weird. Is this how I should really play the game? Because Yak Tribes has created like army builders and made it look so official. I think you can get people into the Community Edition, unlike a lot of other like game variants out there from the community.
Yeah, a lot of the times there might be better versions of the game. Like I think this is one of the issues with Mordheim. Even though Mordheim has had a resurgence, there is a Broheim site, which honestly is probably part of the reason why Mordheim did get a resurgence, because you can get all the rules for free. But Mordheim needs, tuning, because again, there's stuff that was unbalanced, and you cannot get those. There's no official like Community Edition version of Mordheim, so everyone has to hand roll their own house rules. Whereas house rules in Community Edition at Necromunda, from what we played, they're great, very playable, and they even, just to like make it a little bit more clear, like they even highlight the changes from the main rules, so what the differences are from the main game, and you can kind of say, oh well, if you want to do house rules, revert it back to the old Necromunda, you can with your group.
They even have some other like suggested things that aren't like written right into the rules. So
yeah. So for me, I feel like I'm actually I like Necromunda actually quite a bit. If you take the models and the old fluff, I actually don't even really like the new fluff, but if you take the rules from the old game or the Community Edition, the fluff from the old game, and the models from the new game, I really like Necromunda, and I'm really considering trying to put it into our rotation of games, maybe like once every few years or something like that, or maybe, coming up to see if we can get a group.
Yep.
All right, so that's our review of Necromunda. Positive, great. If you want to look for any resources for Necromunda, you can go to Yak Tribe. Just look it up on Google, and you'll get sent to it. It's the only Yak Tribe, I think, online. And then you want to look at the original Necromunda, not Necromunda Under Hive.
Yeah, I think you have to make an account there to download the rules and such. So if you're looking around for the links, you've got to make an account to get them.
Yeah, but it's free, so create an account and then look up Yak Tribe Necromunda Community Edition, and you can find all those links to what we're talking about. And it's free. All right, so that has been our very, very long episode 99 of Dice Over Everything. Apparently, we had a lot of pent-up talking that we had to do.
You could play a lot of games in Necromunda in that time, yeah.
That's true. Has it been a year?
No, in the time of this podcast.
Oh, okay. That's true. Yeah. So if you have any questions or comments about Necromunda, You can give us a shout. Email us at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Yeah, or find us on Facebook. We're Dice Over Everything.
This has been Alan.
Yeah, it's been Brandon.
Bye.